like the teacher. Since when? It was horrible. We can say that, but now kids can say that. You know, so things have truly changed.
Yeah.
You ready? Done?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree. A lot of things.
I call to order this meeting, a special meeting of Stillwater Area Public Schools, District 834, for Tuesday, January 4th. Joan, can you call the roll, please?
Director Hockert? Here. Director Kelsenberg?
Here.
Director Borbeni?
Yep.
Director Riley?
Here.
Director Sherman?
Here.
Director Fatava? Chair Petrie?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Director Sherman's second by Director Porbani. All those in favor of approving the agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we are here tonight to do interviews with two search firms who would like to assist us in our process of choosing a permanent superintendent. And the first company that we will hear from is Ray and Associates. And we welcome Craig Morris, who is here in person, and Bridget Cheney, who is coming in on electronically. So I will turn it over to Craig, and thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate it.
Madam President, directors, it is clearly an honor. I feel extremely privileged to join you and to represent Ray's this evening. I will tell you, I'm going to ask Bridget to introduce herself, and we'll go through our backgrounds. But I live in this district. My children, our children, I should say, attended school all the way through P12. One went arts, one went STEM. They both have done extremely well. And I attribute that to the quality education that this district provided them and the opportunities both during and post high school that were afforded because of the district. Before I go too long here, I want to make sure I'm going to take you through a presentation after we do introductions, but I really think it's important to try to get to the Q&A portion and to answer any questions and to make sure that we're explaining not only the work that we do, but the way that we do what we do, which I think sets us apart from other search firms. And I know you have choices, and I certainly respect those others that are under consideration. So, Bridget, do you mind introducing yourself and just sharing with the board this evening a little bit about your background and your expertise in this work?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, both Craig in person, me virtually. I said to Craig just a moment ago, I've got this heart on my shirt today because I feel like we all need a lot of love right now in the pre-K-12 environment, certainly. And as we kick off January, welcome back. And it is Board Appreciation Month, so I want to appreciate you and say thank you for everything you've done during this time. I know it's hard. I work in the pre-K-12 environment, so I am over our elementary pre-K-8 schools. I supervise and support them, and I'm also the district philanthropic liaison, so work with grants and funds to make sure that we provide every opportunity possible for our children. And what leads me to Ray and Associates, I have to tell you, as someone who has worked for several and many superintendents in my career, there's nothing more important than you and the leader of the district. And what an important decision. It impacts children's lives for their entire life. And that's just a passion of mine. I think that the best fit is important. And I think that helping school boards to select the exact right person at the exact right time is life-changing and altering for students and families. So I'm privileged and honored to be a part of that. And truly, one of the passions that I have is superintendent placement. So thank you for welcoming us today. I appreciate it very much. I will be, I think, doing the speaking of the presentation portion before we get to our Q&A. So Craig, at any point you want to let me know when to begin would be great.
Absolutely, and I think that Bridget's being a bit modest. My sense of her work is nothing short than miraculous. Bridget has received actually national acclaim for going in and looking at where there are improvements or changes to be made to improve student outcomes. And she has done that work as a part of her practice. And she is a very dear friend and colleague. I value her so much. We work together. We have worked together in a number of these and certainly look forward to serving this district as well. I want to talk about some of the folks who aren't here. Sue Jarvis, who is on the far right, actually is a superintendent. She has worked in this field. She understands the work that your next leader will be doing. Michael Collins, who is our president. Michael has a background actually serving on the Ohio State Board of Education. He has run a number of nonprofits that support educational initiatives, and he is a key leader. Unfortunately, he could not be with us tonight, otherwise he'd be joining you. I laughed a little bit because, Bridget, they actually allowed me to have the clicker, so you know what that means. They're trusting me with the slides. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Twin Cities. I have a background in telecom, in the HR, labor relations, and recruitment field, working primarily with executive recruitment. Also leveraged that in the aviation industry for a number of years. Moved into higher ed about 15 years, was the director for academic and global programs for the UW system. Led a recruitment effort for statewide teachers. Some of those teachers, by the way, that came to serve in Minnesota. I currently have a position with St. Paul College. I'm their senior human resources officer, which again involves some aspect of recruitment. But I've been a member of this district for over 30 years. As I said before, our children were able to be successful because of this district. We love this area. I think I know some of the challenges and some of the greatness that has occurred here. I hope you don't mind. I was laughing with your president about the gavel. The gavel is still intact. It's not super glued. It doesn't have tape. It's solid. But your leadership and the work that you've done have really enabled this district to prosper and thrive, and we want to make sure that continues. So let me talk a little bit about what sets us apart and why we're really here. First, we are the oldest, largest, and most diverse search firm in the country. This firm began back in 1975. Its work and its sole work is to do this work. We are not an employment agency. We don't recycle superintendents, and we don't collect a fee from anyone other than the people that are our clients. We do this work, and I think we do it extremely well. The other thing that attracted me to this firm, very candidly, is its operating ethos. Doing this work in the most ethical way, and I think doing it responsibly, and I'll talk more about what that means, is really important in terms of a good outcome. There are a lot of firms out there that will present a lot of people, but those candidates are sometimes not presented in the best interest of your district. It's more about that firm and what they would like to do as opposed to what you need and what your search should consist of. Over 40% of our consultants are women or persons of color. No other firm can make that statement, and there's a reason for that. And there's a reason that we work hard to ensure that our firm is not only diverse, but is also inclusive as we do this work. While the people in front of you, both here and on screen, if you engage our firm, will be doing this work on behalf of the district, there are a number of other people behind the scenes that are going to be doing report writing, conducting background checks and investigations, really reaching out to state professional organizations and licensing agencies to make sure that we fully vet every candidate so that there are no surprises. We will not present people if we think that there is going to be a problem or if there's a question about someone's background. I expect with this search, because of who you are and how well you've done, that you will see well in excess of 40 to 50 people probably applying. There might be more. Of that 40 or 50, our job is to really bring forward to you, I would suggest a field no more than 15, but ideally probably in the area 11, 12, 13, for you then to really select from and identify who you want to consider as semifinalists and finalists. And our job is to make sure that we do that on your behalf. The recruitment process that we engage, I think, is also unique. We have a network of well over 100 associates across the country. We will work with you to produce something called a flyer. And that flyer, very candidly, is the base document that sort of gets people excited about Stillwater and points people to your website and to our website to learn more and to understand how they should come forward. It's also a clear opportunity for those individuals to understand who it is and what you're looking for. And we develop that work by doing a lot of work with you, starting first with you as board members, then working with constituents that you identify in the community, holding key stakeholder meetings and gathering a lot of input. I'm kind of a data geek. I like to have a lot of qualitative and quantitative information that we then can boil down for you and put into useful language and information that will help you then identify what are the strengths of the district and what are the things that are most important for you to want other people to know about you so that we can attract and recruit and bring in the best qualified candidates. I'm going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity for just a moment, but this firm also took the lead even before we saw some of the social unrest and unfortunately some of the events that have taken place in communities that have resulted in harm to certain communities of color and individuals. To make sure that not only because of who we are, we do the things that we should be, but to make sure that we maintain and sustain who we are, which means we have to be a leader in this field of making sure not only are we diverse, but that we're being inclusive. And so we have set aside a lot of time. Our team has spent time talking about this topic in terms of how we will operate, but then also how we will operate with boards and potential candidates. Because as you know, you well know, that the challenge for all of us is to make sure that we're producing future leaders and we're helping students to be equipped for the world that they're about to enter. And you have to take a look at changing demographics, and I'm not talking about individuals' value systems, but making sure that we're looking into how do we really properly educate and make sure that students can be successful and that they can operate in a world where they are going to be dealing with people who may be different from them, right? But who also can contribute, and how to make sure that we leverage that to the best ability of everyone's talents and to the advantage of the organization that we might or happen to be a part of. We will bring to you, as I mentioned before, a pool of candidates, and the process starts after tonight. If we're selected, we'll be back probably within days or a week to talk with you about going through a timeline. Our job is to make sure we reach your objective, and I know that you have a target in mind, and yes, we will work within that target and we will meet that objective. You are in prime season right now for the searching for a superintendent. You're not ahead of the curve, you're not behind the curve, you're in a very good spot. That timeline, though, and that timeline meeting becomes very important because that sets the wheels in motion for then for us to meet that end goal, that target date, which is to have your person named or identified before May with an expected start date of July 1st. Is that correct, or is that not correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're together on that, right? So we'll work with you to establish that timeline and those critical mission points or key points that have to target dates. I typically like to stay engaged with the board president, that we would have constant contact, meaning you and I and the team would meet perhaps on a conference call at least once a week, just to make sure that we're in sync and we're meeting expectations. You will have access to me. There should not be any question about will I be at your meetings. Yes, I will be at your meetings as you need. And you will also have other members of the team here. We do try to be mindful of costs, and obviously with technology and COVID, we want to leverage that. But we are here to serve you. And again, I want to reemphasize, this is your search, not ours. So we'll be asking you things like, who are the key stakeholders? Who are the leaders in your community that we should be listening to? Who would you suggest are those groups that sometimes don't have voice that you want to bring into this process so we can make sure that they're represented? Do you want to have questions and information presented in different languages? We operate in a very diverse region. What are the cultural groups and some of the elders of those groups that we should be talking with? Do you want to be talking with the Chamber of Commerce? Do you want to be talking with faith and religious leaders? Do you want to talk with philanthropic leaders? Do you want to talk with other civic and business leaders? We'll be working with you and your staff to identify a good model to make sure that we do that engagement and that people can feel included in this process as it moves forward. Again, we want to make sure there's full transparency and that no one is caught off guard, or that we're doing something that you or your stakeholders don't know about. Again, this is your search. So having, I think, deep introspection up front, which we will do with you, to get some consensus and read on what your expectations are, what you're looking for in the next superintendent, what your constituents are looking for, and then bring that back to you to talk about now. How do we represent that best to the community using a variety of media and different forums to make sure that that's articulated? We will collect that information that will then be used as we begin the recruitment process, looking for the individuals who really match that profile, right? Who are those people that are really the best suited, right, based on what they're doing, where they've been, or what they've done, to really be brought forward as potential candidates for your review and consideration. And just because, I shouldn't say just because, we are a national search firm. I work with Minnesota, Wisconsin, yes, but the company is nationwide. And it's also my expectation while we will conduct a national search, you may have individuals, I believe that you do in this district, who are interested in coming forward and may serve you well. And that's okay. But that's one of the benefits, I think, of working with a national search firm, because really the strength of whoever emerges is going to be predicated on the strength of the pool of candidates that you consider. You may well end up with someone from within the district. And some might ask, well, then why do we do a national search? Because it makes the search stronger. It gives you the context of who is out there and who will meet your expectations, so that whoever you select can emerge feeling confident that, yes, this was done transparently across the country, considering all candidates available to us. I want to focus on page 7, because, again, this is something I would ask only because of having done this work for so long. Again, that this is your search. It is not our search. It is your search. You will be asked to conduct individual board interviews with our team. We will bring back and present that information to you. We will work with you to, again, identify stakeholder groups and to convene those groups, and through a number of tools that we would offer, solicit input from them about what they're looking for and what their expectations are and what their hopes are for this district. As I said before, we'll work with you on a timeline, and we'll also present compensation information, and we'll work with you to identify a good compensation range. That discussion would take place in our next meeting if we're selected to come back and to serve you. And then finally, you will finalize that profile before it goes anywhere, again, because this is your district. So that's the document that, again, will really speak to the broader public and to hopefully attract people to take a look at your site, our site, and then encourage people to apply if they meet the criterion that you've established. I've kind of covered the profile development, and if I'm moving through this quickly, it's because you have access to this and it's important to know, but I think it's really important that we focus on the Q&A portion so that I can answer any questions you might have. We do aggressively we recruit across the country. I will tell you, we've already had some inquiry, even though you have not selected our firm. People are aware that you are considering Raise and another. And so some people have started to reach out about what we could tell them. Of course, what we could tell them is we haven't been selected yet, but stay tuned. I think I'd also like to ask if you would take a look at the page 11, because this is where it really gets down to the science, but also the art of the selection process. While we will review, you will have access to all of the candidates. You will get to see who was in the pool. You will also get to know why, of that broader pool, the 10 or 12 or 13, whatever number you give us, why we decided to bring those individuals forward based on the information that we have. We will vet each of the candidates, but we will only present the best of the candidates. And we'll tell you why those 10 or 13 were selected from that broader pool of 40. You will also have an opportunity, and I used to be able to boast that this was unique, but another firm has copied us. We used to be the only firm that would put together or have the prospective semifinalists We set them up with a site where they can go out and they can record a self-video of a couple of minutes answering questions that we would pose to them. It gives you some insight in terms of how the person thinks, how they think on their feet, how responsive they might be, how they might present to the public. And that's before you've even done any culling. That comes with that group of 10 or 12 or 13. I think that's extremely helpful. I think that really informs board members because you're getting information not only from us about those individuals, but you actually get to experience them. Even though it's not a two-way conversation, you get a better sense of the individual and how they would represent themselves to your constituents. We will then do work with you. We have a scoring matrix. It's a forced choice matrix that really helps move us towards objectivity and coming to consensus then on who you want to consider as your semifinalists or finalists. It takes a lot of the guesswork and some of the debate out of the discussion about whose candidate is better. I'm not saying this board would do that. Sometimes that happens, and then you need to use a tool or another means of evaluating people to sort of get beyond that. And it has worked well, and so you'll score candidates, and at the end of the evening, we'll come up with a list of, out of those 13 or 14, you might decide that there are really 5 that you want to meet. And then we'll make arrangements to bring those 5 forward. Or you might decide, you know, we really don't want 5. We really want to focus on just 2 or 3. Again, that's your choice. And we'll work with you on making arrangements to bring those individuals forward, to have them here in the district, to have them present, to have them meet with key stakeholders, members of the public, which again can also be a data gathering opportunity, right? And we'll work with you. Bridget and I love that work. You know, to really help make sure that people have an opportunity to meet the candidates that you've selected and for you to get feedback about those candidates and the receptive of each within the community. Finally, we will also work with you while we can offer a set of questions, and we have many that we've used. We will work with you on defining or establishing the board interview questions. We don't think it's right for us to tell you what questions to ask. We can give you examples, we can talk about what other districts have done, and we can make suggestions, but we really try to work with the board. We want these questions to be yours. We want you to own the questions, because ultimately, right, this person's going to be working for you, not the firm. So we want to make sure that they are responding to you, and the only way to do that is to do some work with you to develop your questions and make sure those are presented. If I could, on page 12, and then I'm going to ask that we move to Q&A just in the interest of time. To boil it all down, it comes down to an evening that we would spend, really an afternoon or evening we would spend with you after candidates perhaps have been in town or they presented, or maybe the week after that work is done. You would have an opportunity to look at all of the data and input from your constituents, staff, students, whomever you elect, to really review and vet those candidates. We'll give you everything that we know, everything we've learned. We don't hold back. And we will tell you if someone, you know, has done well, if someone has not done well, if someone did well at one time but then maybe didn't do well at another time. We'll talk about backgrounds and what their interests are, and you have some say in terms of, or you will get to say, you know, we think the top 3 are these individuals. That's where it starts to become, and we will meet and we'll identify those, and that's where you will then authorize Bridget or me or Sue to make contact with your primary candidate. I will go out of the room, I will make contact with them. They will have been notified well in advance. They have to be available. Expect a call from me. You may have questions that evening. You may decide that, no, we want to make an offer to this person. Here's the range and here's the comp package. I will go out, talk to those candidates, make sure that they understand that they're being made an offer, and they will tell me if they accept or not. I will come back into the room and tell you your first candidate accepted, and we'll have further conversation with them tomorrow and start talking about a press release. So it really is, it's a long and arduous task, but the work doesn't end there. And this, again, I want you to please pay attention to, because I think it's a clear point of demarcation in our work versus what others do. I don't consider this to be the end point once we've identified someone. In fact, for me, it's just the beginning. Our firm guarantees that we will not poach someone from you. And ask others about this. We will not come back to try to take someone who perhaps is doing a great job here and try to recruit them away from you for at least 5 years. We also will guarantee that the person we place will be successful with you for at least the first 2 years. And we will do follow-up with you and that individual. We will stay in touch to make sure that they're doing well. We will survey you perhaps 6 months or 9 months after the person's on board. How are things going? What's going well? What should be done differently? What are the areas of improvement? And we will work with that individual to make sure that we're, again, being transparent and honest about what the expectations are and what it will take to be successful. I have found that it's absolutely critical to do that work post-hire. Because if you don't, it's akin to dropping someone off at a doorstep. Okay, here, now, have at it. We have all this wonderful information and data that we've built up and amassed over 60, 90, 120 days. You don't want to let go of that. That information and narrative is useful to you as a board as you make future decisions, as you think about and contemplate strategic planning, for example, or allocation decisions, you know, and you want to do that with that new leader. It should be done in concert with that individual. So that's what I mean about the post-hire work, if you will, that our firm does. Because again, I just think it makes a big difference in terms of that person's ability to feel supported and to be successful, and for the board to feel supported and successful. The other thing I will tell you, we did some research, and Bridget, keep me honest here, because I'm coming to you next, I promise.
That's okay.
You know, Mike did some analysis, and I don't think any other firm can boast this, but I think the national average was somewhere around 5 years or maybe 4 years. Do you remember what the number was based on his review of our candidates? Our
For
placements?
the number of people, the average years, I'm sorry, you were cutting in and out just a
Yeah,
little bit.
the average tenure of our placements.
Yes, the average tenure of our placement is just over 6 years. We were just over 7, and then throughout this trying time of the pandemic, it's gone down just a little bit, but we're just over 6 years at this point. Mm-hmm.
But clearly our data, and it is based on data, we're ahead of other firms.
Yep.
Our placements are proven to be sustained longer and to be able to be successful and retained longer than other firms. And I attribute that greatly to, the background and the depth of the analysis we do on the front end, because it really establishes a foundation, again, about who you're looking for and what are the qualities and attributes that person must have in order to be successful in the district. Now, we started a little bit late. I'm not going to ask you to look at the slides anymore. We have testimony and accolades and all kinds of wonderful data and information about the firm. I really want to make sure we get into, and Bridget, maybe this is the point. I want to ask if you could elaborate a little more about some of those, the community engagement piece, which again, I think sets us apart, about why that work is different and what we do that makes us different. Do you mind speaking to that as well?
Sure, the community engagement piece of it is what you're referencing.
Yes.
So, yes, and I apologize. I can hear you, like I say, coming and going just a little bit. So my apologies. Hopefully you can hear me well. And I will talk about the community engagement because it is one of my favorite pieces of the process, because it flushes up, as Craig said earlier, that quantitative, qualitative data. So we take community groups that you designate, and internal and external folks. They can be administrators, they can be students of course, faith-based, PTOs, anybody that you want a voice from. And we ask them questions about what's going well, what do you love, and what are some of the challenges that the new person will face? What are the things that you hope this next superintendent will bring with them as far as attributes, strengths, characteristics? And what this does is it allows us to really get a good idea of the themes that arise through all of these groups. And I think one of the things that is certainly unique to Ray and Associates is we don't mind if the community stakeholder groups or any stakeholder groups are one person or 200 people. we're all trained facilitators, and we are very, very well adept at in-person or virtual groups. We'll have one-on-one meetings with people if that's something that we need to do. It's all up to you. So I think that's very unique because we really do search out every single voice so that you have a very well-rounded and robust bank of information, if you will. So that's one of the things that sets us apart. And then also just the questions that we ask. Yes, we have standard for each group because we certainly want them to be uniform, but depending upon what bubbles up, we dig deeper. Why is that? Tell us how you came about that. Tell us a little bit more about that if there's something there that we think needs to be explored further, because that's more information for you. It helps us to represent very well some of the voices that perhaps sometimes are not heard. And there's another piece of stakeholder engagement that's really critical. You know how sometimes there are people that are just a little shy about coming to a focus group or a stakeholder group and having their voice heard. Our survey gets to any folks that do not want to be in that public setting, either virtual or in person. They absolutely can take the survey. We encourage it because that gives us really great information as well. So we are just really, really deeply engaged in your community for you as advocates of the board and as ambassadors for your district. So it gives us tremendous information, and we build relationships that way too, so that when we go through the process and help you to select your very best candidate, there's a feeling of ease with your community group as well, because that can often be the linchpin between a successful search and one that is a little more prone to some problems, right? The more you embody the community, internal and external, the more you're able to select someone that you think will fit well based upon what you know in your hearts, but then also representative of the community.
Great, thank you. So to summarize, again, we are the largest, oldest, and I believe the most comprehensive search firm that does this work and does it very well. We've conducted over 1,600 searches. We have a number of key professionals. This is just a small gathering of the group tonight of professionals that do this work in our network across the country. We understand education and we understand the challenges that boards face, and we certainly understand the challenges that superintendents face. Our job is to work for you. It's to represent this community to the best extent possible, to bring forward the best possible candidates, and to make sure that this is something that you can take pride in and feel good about, and to help sustain individuals to be successful. Again, keeping focus on what's important for students. We have a commitment not just to social justice, but to making sure that we, as part of our own operation, that we focus on the key characteristics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we work hard at bringing forward diverse candidates, but making sure that we're bringing forward the best candidates possible for you to consider. I would just say this as well. I think that our background checks, we do a number of those on script, off script. We will also conduct a criminal background check for your finalist at no additional charge. And again, if there's, in my time with the firm, this has not happened, but if for some reason there was a problem and the person you hire does not work out within the first 2 years, we will guarantee to reconstitute and conduct that search at no charge to you, but for any advertising or associated expenses that might be necessary. We'll work with you in terms of contract finalization once you've agreed upon a finalist and they've accepted. We will also assist you with the board setup, the superintendent setup with the board, so coordinating meetings ahead of time, prior to their start date, coming back and having conversations with you, meeting with staff, et cetera. And again, our guarantee of 2 years, and we will not be back to bother anyone for at least 5. But we don't poach people that we place. We want, it just works against our nature, right? We want you to be happy. We want those people to be successful and sustainable in the district if they're doing good work. So why would we? That hurts everyone. That hurts you, that hurts the individual, that hurts the firm. So with that, I want to make sure that I'm being accessible and honoring your time, and just thank you again for your graciousness and the opportunity just for us to even be here this evening. We truly, truly appreciate this.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Real appreciate that. And thank you also to Ms. Cheney up there on our screen. And we will, I think we got probably about a 10-minute late start, so we certainly can go over if board members have questions. So, questions? Director Hockert?
Thank you. I am interested in the community engagement piece and had just kind of a follow-up on the survey piece. I'm curious how many people participate in the survey, or do you tend to get more people in the focus groups? Kind of how does that flesh out for getting people involved?
Bridget, this is a question I'd like you to take on, and I'll follow up. Is that okay? Were you able to hear the question about engagement and focus groups and how many?
Yes, absolutely. So typically we do have more people who do the survey because that's open far and wide. We ask that you blast that to anybody in the community. And even people who attend the focus group certainly can take the survey as well, because the survey is the 31 characteristics or qualities, and they prioritize the top 10 to 12 that they want to see in this next superintendent. So anybody who attends the focus group is also encouraged to take that survey in case there was something missed that they were unable to speak about in the focus group, or in case there are just things that they weren't comfortable saying aloud, we can capture that as well. So we do have more people who take the survey than typically attend the focus groups. But it's really dependent upon the community. What we love to see is upwards of 30 to 40% of the families. So however many families are in any one district, 30 to 40% is a very good reference point for us. If you hit those marks, it's been a very robust engagement as far as the survey is concerned. And then as far as the focus groups, those are as many as you want. So we've had focus groups where I participated in a search last year that had 31 stakeholder groups or focus groups. And they were anywhere from 10 people up to 150 people at a time. So they had tremendous engagement. And that was what their community was used to. And they showed up, and it was all virtual at that point because everybody had shut down. But it's really dependent upon the district. We ask that you, again, broadcast that far and wide, invite the people that you want to see there. You want to have more of an intimate closed setting where you want, let's say, PTO or PTA representatives, and you want to invite 15, and that's more of a closed session instead of inviting that full community group to that one. That's absolutely fine too. I hope I answered your question. I don't mean to be surface in that answer, but it's so dependent upon the district, which is what's such a great thing about Ray and Associates is we'll tailor it to whatever is going to give you the biggest amount of engagement, so you have that great data.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Director Riley?
Thank you. I'm curious how long of a process your focus groups are, because you're from around here, so you know that we can start with a very large group, and then over time we dwindle to very few. People get disheartened, they give up, they quit. How many meetings are we talking about when you want to utilize your focus groups?
Well, I would not advocate for 31. But I do think it's important to think about the composition or constitution of the groups. So where there might be synergy, for example, across business leaders and civic leaders, where you have an opportunity to bring sort of that group. I think for this search, you probably are going to want to look at an array of options, meaning both in person but also online, and then via the website, also having a survey document that's available to people to provide input. I would advocate somewhere in the area of probably 7 to 8 meetings over a course of 2 days with the right combination of groups. And if I may add, and I'm saying that because the COVID we really have seen greater participation online, even more so than when we used to have an auditorium and then 5 people would show up. But the other group that not a lot of people talk about, and that doesn't mean you haven't, is to make sure that you include an opportunity for students. Believe it or not, students typically have some interest in who the future leader of the district's going to be. And I have been amazed at a number of student voices that have come forward and listening to their thoughts and what they see, right? Even though they may be leaving the district, you know, based upon their experience, what was important to them or what they think is going to be important for the people following them. So if you want, we can set up a board meeting and we can talk about that. I don't want to take all the time tonight, but I do have some thoughts on how we might craft this for this district, but I don't want to take your time answering that.
And Craig, if you don't mind, just me popping in, I'll apologize because I didn't specify. We conducted the stakeholder groups at that time over 4 days, 4 consecutive days with a multitude of options of time. So very good point when you asked the question. Thanks for asking that about, interest wanes if you drag it out too long. And that's a very, very good point, well noted. So we do try to conduct them in consecutive days to make sure we hit them. But Craig, you're absolutely right about the amount of stakeholder groups for this particular search. Sure.
And I also think it's important, and I know you're aware of this, but making sure that those are convenient for the stakeholders, right? What are the best times, dates, locations for the groups that you want to hear from? And how do you make sure that people have good access? And that's something else we can talk about in terms of, as we think about composition and who you want to make sure that you're reaching out to. There was another question, I apologize.
Director Sherman.
I just had a question about you mentioned a matrix that's provided. Is that a matrix that's customized to the profile that you facilitate creating with us? Or is that something proprietary to your firm that you just have a general
Well, I want to say it's
matrix?
proprietary. It's a mathematic forced choice matrix
Okay,
where it's the funnel, but it's a mathematical exercise to reduce the number of candidates based on comparing one candidate to another so that you get to the point of finality around who are the best, again, compared to your profile. We don't set that up. In other words, we don't attach a value to the numeric quantity. You get to do that in terms of what you think is important, but then you also get to talk about why you saw those candidates that way. At the end of the day, yes, you are making some decisions and you're assigning a quantity to that. That's really what the instrument does, is it's a forced choice matrix.
okay. So it kind of helps us to be looking at the same criteria.
yes.
So we're all evaluating on a.
Right.
Okay.
And I failed to mention this. We actually have boiled it down. We call it 31 qualities. What we've seen from our experience and data is that really at the end of the day, across the country, there are about 31 different qualities that speak to leadership and people who are successful in these fields. You will identify of those 31, you might say, yeah, we want all of that. Or you might say out of those 31, there are really 12 that are really key for Stillwater, and here's what those 12 are, okay? So that matrix then also does fit into your question as we get into the forced choice. Do these candidates meet those 12 out of the 31?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
So it isn't just subjective. There is some rigor to this in terms of a defined set of words describing personalities, behaviors, skills, and attributes.
Okay. And then one follow-up to that, because I'm kind of getting at the consensus building that you mentioned in your presentation. What's your experience, I guess, with boards and, facilitating that consensus? What does that look like? How is that handled? I'm assuming consensus is a good thing to have in a decision as important as
Right.
this.
So my baggage or bias is I'm actually a qualified neutral mediator under the Minnesota Supreme Court 114 rule. I've actually done work in Washington County, in this district, in Goodhue County, in St. Paul. Building consensus is really about making sure you provide a communication forum for the parties to talk about and to think about what their interests are, right? And to find those areas where there is a common interest. So as we think about what's important to the district, you know, we may come back and ask you certain questions. You may say to us, here are the things we're looking for. We may come back to you and say, well, why is it you think these things are important and not these?
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, right, you each have individual opinions, and that's important. But at the end of the day, we want to have a composite of this board, right, in order to represent who you're looking for externally, so that candidates are clear on what it is you're going to be, who you're going to be looking for when we get down to that last night. Because that's really what this is all about. It's all driving towards that last night's decision. And when you get to that last night, on the one hand, I say it should be hard. And what I mean by that is we want to have 3 or 4 really, really all exceptional candidates that's going to be challenging for you to decide, oh, I want this person, no, I want this person. But it shouldn't be challenging in terms of what you were looking for. Does that help? Because the
Yes.
things that you identify on the front end are what we should be using that last evening. So, on the one hand, we want to make it challenging for you by having all top contenders, but we also want to make it easy for you that you're not still debating, well, we wanted someone who had a strong finance background, because we would have clarified that weeks prior to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Director Barbani.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. I have 2 questions for you. The first
Thank
one
you.
is, in terms of your recruitment, what other venues do you use? I know you said Twitter and Facebook, but apart from Twitter and Facebook and your
Right.
website.
So we use our network of associates. We typically reach out to state organizations, professional organizations, licensing agencies. We use social media, but we also use, and Bridget, you want to talk about, because I know you just engaged in some of this, we use various media. So publications that would be typically accessed by superintendents or those in P12 education. We have a list of media sources that we can recommend. We will provide you with ad rates, but we go beyond that. We also, and the real work of recruiting is actually going out and asking about people that meet your profile, and then going to talk to those individuals about would they be interested or have they thought about the Stillwater district. And if they haven't, making sure that we acquaint them with your district. We then talk with them further about, if they're interested, how they should submit, what we see as the opportunity or benefit. And again, that's really where the recruitment happens. I mean, advertising and taking the, I call it, you know, the more passive route, while that is recruiting, I really talk about an active recruitment. And that means you have to go out and affirmatively make contact with people and affirmatively try to make sure that they understand the opportunity that your district represents. And I and Bridget and Sue and Michael and a whole lot of other people behind the scenes will be doing that for this search.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
It does, just so I have.
I just didn't tell you all my
follow-up.
sources, okay?
No, I do, because I know it's a difficult time for recruitment in all aspects, including this position, so.
It is. I will be honest with you. It takes a little more in this environment
Right,
because people are a little more skeptical. You know, there's some uncertainty. And I think there's fatigue, right? Anyone in education is fatigued. There's no way around it. So it's going to take something to cause more people to say, yeah, I think I might want to move now as opposed to waiting maybe 2 more years, right? We've seen that, but that doesn't mean that that the work doesn't stop. And people seeking new opportunities has not stopped. I can assure you of that. We have a number of robust searches around the country right now.
right.
The number of really good candidates has not decreased.
So talking about that, what is your average number of applications you receive in each one of your positions across the country?
I'm going to tell you, Bridget, maybe you want to talk about some of your experiences, but I would say it varies depending upon the district.
It does vary, yes. So I have seen as many as, or as few as 25 for a district, very small district. So not, it was 1,200 students, and so it was going to take a person who wanted to move into that area, be very embedded into that community right there. As it was not a place that had a lot of aspiring superintendents nearby. And that was 25 that I saw there. Have a search right now that we just closed actually yesterday, has 42 applicants that have applied and completed applications. And that's in an outer ring suburb of an area. So it is, Craig's right, it's wide as far as the completed applications, and you're in a wonderful place and have a wonderful reputation. So I would anticipate anywhere from that 35 to 45 range, just based upon what I've seen across the nation as far as, I'll say in the last year and a half, as far as searches go. Craig, what are your thoughts about that? Would you
This is,
concur?
now they're going to see us at work. I think this search is going to see 50 to 60.
Okay, good.
I really do.
Okay. Okay.
Director Kelsenberg.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. I'll ask one if there's time. I'll go into others. But so you get these candidates, and they're going to be interviewing, but also they're going to be asking questions of us. So what are a couple common questions we might expect? I'm sure there's a lot, but common.
Again, I'm biased. I'm here in the district, so maybe I have some insight. But I think one of the things a candidate might ask is why were you successful in your levy ask of the community? Because there are a lot of districts that struggle with that. So what was it that you did differently? I think a superintendent a prospect might ask things like, will you be expecting them to live in the district? And my answer would be, yeah. You don't want someone who is going to be passed through, and you don't want someone who is going to look at this as this is a stepping stone to something else. My belief is you want someone who is going to engage, invest, embed themselves in the community, who's going to be directly accountable and accessible, and they're not just here during the week and then they're someplace else on the weekend. I think you could see candidates asking about, you've gone through school closures. You know, how did you make those decisions? And where are you in that process? And, you know, as I was discussing earlier, those are decisions made at a point in time. That doesn't mean those buildings are closed forever. You may be back revisiting those topics in 3 or 4 years. And I think they may be asking things like that or around that, like, what are your projections? What do you see in terms of those that were closed? What future uses or opportunities might be? So I think people will generally, they'll do their homework, they'll look at what's publicly available, but then they will come in asking the questions that they're going to size you up based on if they think they can be successful, right? Because if they believe that they have experiences and skills that can help move the district, and they see this as an attractive opportunity in terms of their career and family, you're going to have good people, and you will have good people coming forward.
Right? Thank you.
I had a question about, you have as we develop this profile of the ideal candidate, you've got 31 desirable characteristics, and I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more about that, because it seems to me like every district is looking for the same thing, which is a charismatic leader who walks on water, right? So,
That's it. In fact, that's number 1 and 2.
So, yep.
It gets into things, and I can send you them. There's nothing magic about this in the interest of time, but it will look at things. There are really 2 profiles. Let me be clear, if I didn't make this clear. You're going to develop a community profile, right, on the district. So what are the points of pride of the Stillwater district? What do you want people to know about this district? That's one profile that ends up going into a flyer. But then the profile of your ideal candidate, which is what you're speaking to, we focus on those 31 qualities for you to identify of those 31. I've been hard pressed to find people find something that's not on that list, but it does go through things like orientation to finance, strategic thinker, consensus builder, a person who maybe has dealt with a significant turnover on a board, and are they comfortable dealing with a new board? Or if a board who might be 50-50, right? No matter what, the votes always come down to there's X number for and X number against, and how do they navigate in those spaces? Key communicator, walks on water. I think also just has to have that, can build trust and can lead effectively by empowering others. So building capacity, right? Do you want a leader who is more autocratic and is going to be very directive and prescriptive, right? Do you want a leader who, as I said before, is going to be more strategic thinking and is going to build capacity and really empower people and hold people accountable to making decisions? Do you want a leader who's going to be more internally focused, right? Because there are some school districts where there may be problems with leadership or problems with curriculum or problems with classroom space, right? And they need to spend time in those buildings and those environments to really get a sense of what's going on. Or do you need someone who is also going to be out there external in the community, really building relationships and making sure the community knows about all the good work and what's going on within the district? Who again is accessible to parents and key stakeholders outside of the district office and the classrooms. So those are some of the things that might be variables that you'll want to look at. But you'll see in the 31 qualities, there's nothing magic, but those 31 qualities really do outline what we have found to be key attributes of those that are successful in this work. And we'll share that with you. I mean, I thought we maybe had shared the 31, but we'll send it to you tomorrow. There's nothing magic about it.
Okay, thank you. Director Barbini.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. So I'm looking at your board selection of candidates. So the understanding is you have the scoring instrument.
Yes.
So you build the matrix, the contents in the matrix and the survey. It's what helps to develop the questions that we'll ask. Is it just the questions that you have, or do you have any other means or any other process in terms of determining with the questions the semifinal or final candidates?
Yes, you'll have a good amount of background information. Our report writers will provide to you their analysis, having talked with people who are references, talking with people in professional associations that know these candidates. You know, we'll ask them things about how well they worked with teachers or how well they worked with community groups. Or
Any form of assessments they can do separately through a third vendor as well, so at least you can deduce those psychological and emotional and all those kinds of things. Do you do that as well?
we look for the consistency in the information that we present, but we don't filter the information. You'll get to see the raw data based on the people that we've contacted. And one of the other reasons that we go through such an in-depth analysis and documentation is, of course, down the road, if there should ever be a question, we want to be able to defend the decision. So we can say, here was the information, here's what the board was using to evaluate the candidate, and this was the decision that was made about candidate X versus candidate Y. Does that help, or am I not answering your question?
No, the background and the references and all that are very important. But what I'm asking is, apart from the background, apart from the references, you know, with you identifying all of those different areas, we know we have special instruments in terms of psychological analysis that they can
Yes.
do as well. Is that something that you do? Because that identifies not just the emotional state based on the questions that I asked, and maybe not by you, by a third party, and the board will only, those that interview will be the ones that will have access to that information and will be able to deduce the results from that as part of a process for in line or along the same line with the interview, the background check, the references, all of the analysis that you do. This position is a very high-level position.
Yes.
And we're looking for candidates who can truly walk on water. Joking there, but I mean, if you come close to it, yes. And so we want to be able to have everything in place. We don't want to have perfection on the surface, then internally we're having some kind of chaotic struggle. So what can we do differently by making sure we're using instruments in place that may not be from you, but through a third-party vendor with all of those kinds of psychological assessments to deduce emotional intelligence, to deduce artificial intelligence, to deduce all the kinds of psychological intelligence, all the types of intelligence along the same line with the interviews that we conduct. I think it's very important for this kind of leadership position and for a district as huge as ours. So I think just the interviews and the backgrounds and the references are not enough as a determining factor for this position.
And I'm going to answer your question this way, and I'm going to go off script here because I'm not going to say this from the perspective of Ray's. In my over 30 years of recruitment, especially at executive level positions, again, across an array of public and private sectors, psychological test instruments can serve well when you're looking at a specific performance area or a specific behavioral pattern necessary for a particular role. I have not found them to be particularly useful when you're looking at predictive behavior, especially in a multifaceted role as a superintendent. And I mean, no disrespect, I appreciate and I do respect your position. I think if you look at the 31 qualities from the standpoint of, are those indicative of behavior performance that you can use, right? If you say, I'm identifying this behavior, temperament, for example, are there examples of temperament that would indicate to me that this person works well under pressure and under stress or under increasing pressure? And have there, if you say that's important, have there been examples through the background and reference checking where a person has been noted, right, that they didn't maintain a good temperament when dealing with a difficult situation, a parent or a child or a decision about a faculty or staff member, where that was not evident and that comes out? I think it gives you the same information.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm a bit passionate about leadership positions, if you can see.
Yes.
During interviews, we can ask questions. Expertise also matters in being able to identify those behavioral contents in terms of competency during interviews.
Yes.
If you don't know what you're looking for, you will not be able to find what you're looking for, even with the questions that you ask.
I agree.
So you can't deduce temperament by just asking questions if you don't know what you're looking for.
No, but
So
you can ask,
I-
as a quality, has this person exhibited good decision-making and temperament under increasing stress? You can ask that question. And I think it will give you some facet of a result and answer if, looking at the array of people that we talk to, if there's an indication that that person has not been able to maintain good temperament, it will come out. By the way, again, you as the board get to develop the interview questions.
I agree.
And I am agreeing with you.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that I think it's important to also have, you can give the perfect answer. Interviews can be very subjective, so you can
Yes.
give the perfect answer, the very best, and we all get excited. I've been in this field over 20 years, and I've made my mistakes. You see perfection right here, and when the person starts, it's a nightmare. And you ask yourselves, what happened? So I think that's why sometimes using the other forms of assessment that helps with both emotional, helps with psychological, helps with behavioral. I mean, it just checks all of those things based on the way the questions are asked and answered. It's a lot more direct, and you can't lie your way out of those kinds of things. I'm just saying it's good to have that with the interviews that we conduct and with the work that you will do in terms of background and references. So having all of that on the table will give us a better idea. You will be surprised that the question that we ask that deals directly with emotional intelligence may be different in terms of how it's answered as against a question that is answered more from a psychological aspect. And so comparing those, it may be similar in terms of just looking at the question. Actually, it is similar, but when it's asked may look like it's different, and the answers may be different as well. So that way you're able to pick out, there's something right here. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm just asking if you
Sure.
have the
And please
needs as
understand,
well.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm not saying I'm not saying these are mutually exclusive. I think that there is some value. We don't use psychological instruments as a normal part. That doesn't mean that you could not.
Right.
And I also think it would be important, it's a both and. I think that you really want to have that composite if you're really intent on offering and trying to get that perspective as well, because you do get some of that through the interviews and the background work that we do, it's perhaps more correct to have the additional benefit of the instrument if that's something your board wishes to administer. We do not, as a normal part of our routine, we have not found it to be that significant in terms of, does that give us a better predictor of the person's success? Quite often in a lot of these roles, I'll be honest with you, what ends up being a predictor are things like board changes, sudden economic downturn, significant loss in terms of enrollment, students leaving the district, significant turnover in terms of staff personnel and composition of the district, not being able to have a successful levy, right, or vote in favor of a levy. And sometimes I think superintendents, because of where they're at a particular phase of their life, they decide, I now want to move on. And they may not be as robust, or may not be as accessible, or may not be contributing at the same level. And boards and people start to notice that. And then those relationships change. I'm getting far astray, and I'm sorry. I agree with you. How's that? But we need to talk more, okay?
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to have to wrap this
I
up
know,
in just a second, but I do have one more question. Over the last 25 years in this district, we have had superintendents that came from within the state.
Yes.
That has just been the pattern. Although I know that there have been attempts to try to find candidates nationally. I mean, we're a smallish district. It's hard to get somebody to come in from out of state. I noticed that you have a long list of districts that you've worked with, but it looks to me like you've only done superintendent searches in Lakeville and St. Paul.
That's me personally.
Oh, that's you personally. Okay. So I guess my question is, do you have the connections to be able to actually recruit those candidates within the state of Minnesota? Because
Yes.
generally speaking, that's probably where our candidate pool is going to come from.
Hold me to this. I think you may be surprised if we are selected, the array of candidates and where they may come from. And we give you that data, by the way. We track that. I believe that you will see candidates from outside the 5-state area. I think that you will see candidates from one or both coasts. I think you will see candidates from the South. And that doesn't mean that you don't have good candidates here. That's not what I'm saying. But I think you may be surprised. I also I think that the end result is a product of who you select to do the search. And the array of candidates and the quality and the diversity of candidates that come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Hockert, did you have one quick question
Yes,
here?
if I could sneak it in.
To wrap up?
Just real quick, can you walk us through kind of that final night of the decision-making night when we're interviewing candidates and having to hopefully come to a consensus? How do you facilitate that? Do you facilitate that
Yes.
discussion? Like, what is your part in that final night?
I am all in. We are here. We will probably need coffee and some sandwiches. You've told your families it's going to be a long night. No, sometimes it's not a long night. If we've done our jobs well, you will have already had the information, and you will have been provided with feedback from a myriad of sources about those 3 or 4 people that you just met and that your community just met. And we will come into a session like this, and we'll talk about those qualities. And then we'll go through each of those candidates in terms of, is there consensus or support for candidate A, candidate B, candidate C? And it might be that you feel all 3 should come forward. Okay, so who do you want to make an offer to? And you will authorize me to make an offer to candidate A. I will go outside of the room, I will speak with that candidate, and they will already have been told, look, make sure your cell phone's on, make sure your computer's on, make sure your Twitter account's up, make sure that every media source you have, because I'm going to be calling you, right? And I'm going to need to talk with you. Good, bad, or whatever, right? And you will tell me what I can tell that person. and I will come back to you and I will give you their response. And sometimes there's a little bit of an iterative process there. Sometimes it might be they accept, and now we have to talk about how much time they need so they can give their district notice and when we're going to work on a press release. There should be no surprises, and the evening shouldn't be stress-filled, but it's stress-filled because if we've done our jobs well, we've given you candidates that you're going to have a hard time deciding which one you want to make the offer to.
I guess that's the part that I, like, how do we come to consensus when we have those hard decisions to make? Is there, like, do we vote? Do we have a matrix that we work through? Like, what
Yes.
tools do we work with
Right.
to bring us to consensus?
We take you through the matrix, but it still comes down to, you know, we might say, look, 5 of you were for this person, and, right, you still get to talk about it. But at the end of the night, you have to come together. You authorize me as to who I can talk to. And we don't leave until we kind of finish that process. I mean, we have to get to that point of finality. You are the board, I'm not. So you make the choice. We present the information. And really, again, what I have found is if we've done the prior work well, you're clear, you understand the candidates, you've read the community, you've had internal discussion about what you're looking for, one of those will emerge. It usually doesn't take a lot of debate. It becomes fairly clear early on if we've done those other things well. I give you my word on this.
Thank
And I'm there with you. So if it ends being a long night, you know, I'm staying up late too. But we do that in the interest of making the best choice for our students. Agreed?
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Morris, Ms. Cheney, thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate this presentation, and we will be in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Again,
much.
very much appreciate your time. Good luck. And if there's anything I can do, I'm just down the street.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Be well.
All right, we're now going to move on to the second interview of the night, and we are going to welcome Barb Dorn and John Ward to the table here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then here is the link for your presentation, and then I'll get that. Okay. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it.
We're standing downstairs in the lobby. We didn't want to observe.
I understand. No, that's,
I thought that would be.
yeah, nope,
appropriate,
that
so
was,
We've been waiting, so we're not late. I hope it's okay that we stayed down there to give them the time to do what they needed to do to share with you.
we appreciate your discretion.
Okay, great, thank you.
So we are willing to hear what you have to say. Anytime you want to get started, just, we're all ears.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you so much for inviting MSBA to present to you tonight regarding executive search services for the Stillwater Area School District. We're thrilled to be here. We would love to share with you about 20 minutes of information about our process, but then we also hope that there is time for questions where we can engage with you in the questions that are specific to your search, so we can address those as well.
Barb, do you want to move that microphone over nearer to you? Thank you.
Should I lean closer? Is that the trick with the mic?
I don't think you need to, but just needs to be more in the vicinity.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So we are anticipating about 20 minutes of presentation, and then however many questions you have, we'll stay until we've answered everything you might need to know. So I want to start here with thanking you for having us here this evening on January 4th to present. The team that's listed here, is it next? There we go. I am Barb Dorn. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Executive Search. I work in the areas exclusively of superintendent search and superintendent evaluation, and then all hands on deck for things such as a leadership conference, webinars, trainings, and things such as that. So with me is John Ward. I'll turn it over to John for introductions.
Yes, I'm John Ward. I'm Associate Director of Strategic Governance. I work almost exclusively with searches, but I have a rich tradition of other duties as assigned, so I'll work in other areas when called on. But this season, to this point, it's been pretty exclusive on searches.
A lot of search work. Also, you can see on the search team at MSBA are all of our staff in the areas that actually tie into and support superintendent search include our human resources, our marketing team, technology, communications, our policy, and our governance folks. All of those facets of MSBA weave into the work that we do in superintendent search, and so the resources are quite deep staff-wise at MSBA to facilitate the work that we do with searches. And then our service providers, we have a group of folks who are former superintendents, former school board members that allow us to expand and contract our staff as needed, especially during search season. Their perspective is extremely valuable for us in terms of vetting applications, calling candidates, checking references, and leading searches on occasion as well. So that's who would be working on the team in Stillwater area. Now, this is an overview. I'm not going to dwell on this one because every one of those checkboxes has its own slide. So I'm not going to read this to you, but this is traditionally a search from beginning to end. It's typical. I think a lot of the firms that you've visited with or proposals you've read touch on many of these same parts of a search. I think the nuances of a search are in the details. And so one of the things that we hope to do tonight is to talk through how we approach a search, but also address some of the things that make MSBA's services different than those that you might be visiting with for other things. So I'm going to move right on from this one and get into planning the search. Obviously, before you launch the search, you need to have all your ducks in a row. And there are many things that you have to decide very quickly. There's a flurry of activity within the first 2 weeks of deciding to launch a search. The first is to discuss and determine your search timeline. You'll want to be looking out about 2 to 3.5 months and determining when all of the meetings will occur, what time of the day they will occur, special meetings, regular meetings, et cetera, just to make sure that everyone is available. This is not something that you want to delegate to a subcommittee of the board. A superintendent search requires the attention and the time of all board members as a collective because you are hiring the leader of your district and all of you should be participating in all of the meetings. So the search timeline is really important. Now, one of the things that always crops up for us with timelines is our awareness at MSBA of days you can't meet. And so there's always times as we're guiding boards through when they're going to be meeting. Just last night, John had a board that was thinking of meeting on March 8th. Well, that's township election day, so they can't meet between 6 and 8 if they have township elections in their district. So those sort of attention to detail, I think, is helpful because we're very aware of a state statute relative to board activity, what you can, can't do, and when you can and cannot do it. So the timeline will be very important to identify first. Now, hiring criteria and leadership profile, you'll hear a lot about that. And the purpose of that is to really discuss and decide what kind of leader will best fit Stillwater area public schools. All right, you're unique. You have different programs, different needs, different activities, different student body, different boundaries, all kinds of things make you special. So you want to take a good hard look at what kind of leader, skills, background, expertise, experience, personality, characteristics, those sorts of things that you're looking for in someone. Now, superintendents have a lot on their plate. So we usually provide you with a list of perhaps 27 criteria, and we'll help you select those you feel that rise to the top. For us, the challenge is all of those criteria are important because superintendents' jobs are so broad and so deep. So all of them matter. We simply want to help the board ascertain which ones will rise to the top as the most important for your particular district. That leadership profile then is used by applicants to decide whether or not they should apply. If you're looking for someone very different from them, they probably will not spend time applying because there are a lot of things that go into applying for the position of superintendent. If, though, they feel like it aligns with their skills, their talents, their values, they will apply. So deciding who you're looking for, what sort of characteristics you have in mind is going to be really important, and you do that very, very early in the search process. Also, in planning the search, you need to talk about stakeholder involvement. I have a whole nother slide on stakeholders, so I'm going to skip right over that, but I want to tell you that stakeholders will be an extremely important part of your search process. Extremely important. You have a lot of stakeholders district-wide. They must be involved in the search. I will say, however, that you are the hiring authority. One of the things we run into most with stakeholders is unmet expectations about their role and how much of a voice they have in making the decision about who will be hired. If expectations are not clear with your stakeholders from the beginning of a search process, one of the most unfortunate things that we've seen happen is when it's all said and done, and you as the hiring authority have selected a superintendent, if you don't hire who perhaps the hiring committee says you should hire, that residual resentment can last for years, and it's very detrimental to the health of the district. So expectations around that are going to be real important, and I'll revisit stakeholder involvement here in just a moment. The points of differentiation, as I mentioned, you want to be able to share who you are very authentically. Who is this district, and what are you looking for? All right, we also understand how to aggressively market the position, and one of the keys to marketing the position is understand your position in the marketplace. What other positions are open, what sorts of leaders might apply for those positions, and what makes this unique so that we can portray that in the marketplace for applicants to pique their interest and have them delve deeper into the opportunity. Finally, the vacancy brochure is a very important part of the planning process, the marketing plan. That will be something that, again, you'll use to simply tell folks, this is an overview. If you're interested, there's more information here. And folks will go to your website, they'll go to MDE, they will talk to people. Word of mouth is one of the most powerful ways to advertise a position. So all of that happens right up front. And it is on page 2 in the proposal. You can see a lot more about it there. The next slide, though, I do want to talk about stakeholder input and involvement here for a moment. There's many different methodologies used to involve stakeholders. Now, I'm going to speak first about the methodology in the early phase of the search, because stakeholders can be involved in the early part of the search and in the later part of the search during the interview process. Now, in the early part of the search, we have found that an online survey is the best way to gather feedback from your stakeholders. Couple of reasons for that. One, we learned during the pandemic that focus groups were not viable anymore. We had been doing them, as do most search firms, as part of that initial stakeholder involvement piece. So we needed to drive everyone to the online survey. When we did that, and it became really the only tool for folks to provide their input, participation rates nearly doubled and transparency increased significantly. And we learned what that was is during focus groups, again, having done them for a long time, and we did them early in the pandemic, people were reluctant to speak up and say what they really thought in front of peers, colleagues, neighbors, or friends. And so we went online with a focus group early in the pandemic, and I think we had about 30 people that came. And I said to myself, this is really going to be great. We have a lot of people here. There's a lot of interest. They're going to share with me what's important. And I have the standard questions, 4 or 5 questions we asked everyone. Over the course of a 1-hour focus group with 30 people there, I had 4 people actually say something, and it was the same 4 the entire time. The rest were lurking. They wanted to listen to what other people said. And yet when they go to the survey, it's anonymous. And we then added the qualitative questions to the survey. It used to be the survey was a quantitative. Pick your top 6 this, pick your top 6 this. Is experience as a superintendent important? We added qualitative open-ended questions that we used to ask in the focus groups. What people shared was the honest truth, what they thought. And they would not share that very often in the focus groups because speaking up in front of people you know is not always a safe space to be, depending upon your opinion. The other thing that came out of the pandemic are these Q&A sessions with MSBA. Because we learned from a couple of focus groups where people didn't say anything, but they showed up, they were wanting information. That was what was key, is they wanted to know what was going to happen, when would it happen, how would it happen. So this year we launched these Q&A with MSBA sessions in all of our searches, and it has proven to be a tremendous asset. It provides access to everyone that wants to be a part of the search and understand what's going to happen. And I don't know if anyone had a chance to watch one. I sent a link to Joan. Mm-hmm. If you happen to watch that, the goal is to provide access and transparency. So stakeholders not only, if they can watch it live, submit questions in advance, I answer every question. There's been some tough questions. Yet we record it and put it on the district's website. So for a couple of months, people can watch that at any point. Now, if we had perhaps 20 people at the Q&A live, every once in a while I go back and check, because it's on the website there. I check and we're up to 70 or 100 people that have watched it afterwards. And it's become a very important staple of our search process because the information is there for everyone and it's very, very accessible. Now, the other thing that I want to mention on the online survey too, not everyone has access to computers nor wants to use a computer to fill out their survey, so you must have hard copies at the district as well. And if you have it in multiple languages, the online survey should be in a multiple language as well as the hard copy. It's also an ADA requirement that you have it accessible at the district office in hard copy, so folks who don't use computers or don't want to can fully participate. So we found that to be really important. Now, jumping ahead for a moment to the input forums, I'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, but that's stakeholder involvement toward the end of the search. If you decide that you would like stakeholders to be a part of the interview process, again, semantics are important. They're not a hiring committee. They are an interview committee or an input forum is what we like to call it. Might be staff members, might be community members, might be parents. They can be a part of the interviews at the conclusion of the search. Excuse me. I have a tickle in my throat. Is there any chance I could get a bottle of water, Joan? Thank you so much. When you get to that point, we would walk you through that because you really have options when it comes to stakeholders at the conclusion of the search. Depending upon the online survey, if you have a really robust response rate and you feel like the stakeholders' voices came through loud and clear in that survey with the qualitative and quantitative data, we will provide you with a summary of that survey and all of the trends that emerged. If you want the raw data, we will also provide you all of that raw data. The thing to keep in mind with the raw data is if you get the raw data from that online survey, it is subject to data requests. And so if someone requests the data, you must have someone in the district redact information that is inappropriate or illegal that has to be redacted before people see it from a data request. But we'll do a summary and you can see the raw data if you choose. Thank you. So some boards find that the interviews are done just fine with the input from the survey itself. Other districts choose to go forward with these input forums where they interview the candidates. It's like a round robin. Staff are interviewing the candidate while you're interviewing this candidate. Community's interviewing this candidate. So it's a busy and a very full day. We also have to, though, make sure that those input forums are asking questions that are legal. It is not a free-for-all Q&A loose session because there are things you cannot ask. Discriminatory laws are very important, and so we'll guide not only the board through your questioning, but we also want to work with those input forums and train them on how to interview candidates in the public sector so they're not violating any anti-discrimination laws either. Did I miss anything on the input forums?
No, I don't think so. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but the training of the community is going to be something that we're going to reference in because you'll need training as well as it relates to what you can ask or can't ask. So on this slide, when you talk about stakeholder input, if you did decide to identify committees, they'd have to stick to the same questions. They'd have to know where they can't go legally. The staff input or the input forums is a little different. You would be interviewing candidates you might have people in the stands that have a form where they get to just list strengths and list areas of growth, but they don't talk to the candidates, and you could take that information and use it as you make your decision. So you need to be in charge of the process. You're the decision making, and so that's why those pieces are there. But you have options for stakeholder input.
Yep. And that was the third option, is some boards choose to have representative stakeholders observe board interviews and provide audience input forms, which we also then summarize and provide to you for your deliberations. So the end of the end of the process input by stakeholders can be 3 different things in our area, in our estimation, depending upon what you're looking for. I made a note there that it's important to note that you are the only hiring authority. Unmet expectations are hurtful, and so we want to make sure stakeholders know exactly what's going to happen and why it's going to happen that way. I'll touch briefly on the methodology. I know page 3 in our proposal mentions this, but this was also perhaps a silver lining of the pandemic. When we quit doing focus groups, not only did the surveys result in higher participation and more transparency, but what we found out is it became a matter of equity. All stakeholders had the same access to providing input. So with focus groups, now we will conduct focus groups if that's something that the board chooses to proceed with. They're a traditional way of gathering information from stakeholders. We have done them in the past. We will do them if it's something the board requests. The only thing I would keep in mind is that focus groups traditionally, there are people who are unable to participate in them due to barriers. So if someone, for example, wants to be a part of the focus group, but they don't have transportation, or they don't have childcare, or they don't speak English, or they do shift work and can't come at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, whatever it might be, or they're afraid of speaking in public, it seems like focus groups traditionally have amplified some voices over others and allowed some voices to be more, have more input into the process. And so by ensuring a level playing field, by not conducting focus groups, we have found it to be more equitable, and it removes the barriers to participation that I believe focus groups inherently have. It's different because all of the proposals you read and presentations, I'm sure, have talked about focus groups being a great way to gather stakeholder input. And it can be. It can be also a very powerful PR tool to perhaps appease special interest groups that want their own focus group or want to be heard. That's a valid reason to conduct it. I have not ever, however, learned something in a focus group that I also didn't learn from the survey. It's just that some folks got to say it twice in the focus group and the survey. So something to think about. I just want to make sure that we had a chance to address that. As far as recruiting and advertising the position, the first thing we want to say is we conduct a national search for all of our searches. We're a member of NAS, the National Affiliation of Superintendent Searchers. That is made up of school board associations across the country that do superintendent search. We also use the Revelis database, which has been an absolute phenomenal addition to our services. We used to use AppleTrack until last year. AppleTrack was the process we used for people to apply. Revelis has given us a whole new view on applicants, because when they apply, it's simpler for applicants. They fill out one sort of profile with all of their information that doesn't change, work history, educational history, transcripts, all of that. Then the application itself is unique to each district. So they don't have to redo everything if they're interested in 2 positions, for example. The applications are much more customized to the districts, and they allow you to ask custom questions so that you as a board, when you're screening the applications and as we're preparing our recommendations for who you might want to consider interviewing, the questions you're reading in the applications are specific to Stillwater area public schools. It's not the same questions that all the other districts are asking. So it's one leg up, I think, on the early review of your applicants to decide who you might want to bring in for interviews. We also will post on national sites if that is something that you are interested in doing, and that information is provided in there. There are some that are readily accessed by folks on a national level, such as EdWeek and AASA. There's also some very good specific national sites to attract educators of color. There's the National Alliance of Black School Educators. There's the Latino Educators Association. Any of those are optional. Those are offered a la carte in our proposal, as you can see as well. Not every district chooses to advertise in those spots, but you certainly may. Now, speaking from experience, you've got Minnesotan as well as nationwide candidates. I'd say that MSBA's website and MASA's website are the go-to places to look for positions. Any candidate looking to work in Minnesota will go to one or the other site. That's just the first place that they look. And we get thousands and thousands of hits during search season on that as well. We'll do some targeted outreach. We send emails. We have a large database, especially in the state of Minnesota, of folks, you'll see them listed there, that might be interested in the opportunity to work here. And then also we do a lot of networking, our personal and professional networks amongst our entire staff, our partnerships with MASA. John's work history for a long time is very...
Well, can I talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you can.
The job you're looking for, you're right, I think someone said earlier tonight that if you took a look around, this is anecdotal, I don't have hard data, but almost every superintendent in the metro's been a Minnesota educator in some capacity. That doesn't mean that there can't be somebody from outstate that comes, but if you just look at the history, and I'm not talking about now, but the history over the last 20 years, there's a better than 50-50 chance that it's likely to be someone from here. Now, that said, sitting superintendents are in a very difficult position because they're going to have very few confidants because they can't afford to let it out that they might look at another district for fear that if that got out, they wouldn't be able to do their job. It doesn't mean they don't like the district they're at. It just means that they may want a different opportunity. And it's the same with assistant superintendents and executive directors and some principals. One or two people might know. So when you talk about targeted outreach, you know, MSBA's got the search. I will contact some of my contacts. We all have them. They might know somebody in your case who has said, what's going on in Stillwater? I've had my eye on Stillwater for 2 years. I might not know that. What they can do is make that link and say, this is the situation, this is what I know, and then turn it over to that candidate because they don't want it broadcast. So those are really, really important because many people won't run the race unless they think they have a reasonable chance to get it because they don't want to send the wrong signal to the people they work for now because they like their jobs. So I can't oversell how important those contacts are because of the nature of the job, but that's enough.
Absolutely. And as you know, names are very important to remain private until you've selected your finalists. You'll be discussing candidate ABC when you do your finalist selection. Then once those names are public, all the other names remain private data forever, those folks who applied for the position that weren't selected as finalists. So those are the kinds of things we guide you through during the training prior to the candidate selection meeting. And of course, you're an EEOC district. We are a search agency as well. If you have any internal applicants, they must be treated exactly the same as external applicants. There are no different processes for them. They also, you must abide by data privacy laws relative to internal candidates. Sometimes we've had districts with an internal candidate that's telling everyone they've applied and that they're excited about it. You as board members cannot confirm or deny they've applied until you name them as a finalist. And if they're a finalist, then their name becomes public. So it's just really important that you as board members are aware that there's this balance between the open meeting law and the Data Practices Act that you must stay within all the time because the entire search process is conducted in the open. And that's really important. So we'll keep you in the lanes there in terms of those sorts of things. All right, I'm going to turn it over to John for a moment to talk about some of the training. We've touched on a bit, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I referenced when we were talking about training for the community, if you did stakeholder input and wanted to go that route. But there's training involved with you as well to make sure that we don't run afoul of anything. That's around the open meeting law. Data privacy is a huge piece of it. Data requests from the public is part of it, and then discriminatory practices. So we would go through what is you can say, can't say, all of those things. We feel pretty good about our ability to do it. We have 3 attorneys that work at MSBA. 2 of us work on searches. And I do think it's important because we're well-versed in Minnesota law. Because that's where we've been, that's where we were trained, but it's really important that you go through that. And we're gonna talk about it in a training session. We're gonna have to talk about implicit bias too, because we all have them and we bring them to the interview process. And so if we can guard against that and make sure that every candidate gets a fair hearing. But so there's training around that. And then we'll put together the sample interview questions. So to back up, if you pick, say 4 to 8 qualifications you're looking for in a superintendent. Those aren't questions. Those are like, this is what we're looking for. Candidates will look at that and tailor their answers to that for obvious reasons. Then we will give you the first round of questions, a number of questions that are tailored to those 4 to 8 areas. And then you'll select from that or come up with your own. And that's to get a sense in the first round of who these people are and whether or not they're worth our time to bring back. Didn't sound quite right, but whether we want to invest in them and bring them back for another interview. So that would be a part that would happen after the brochure, after the candidates are in, and we think it helps you kind of hone in. And then obviously in the second round of interviews, you'd go much deeper with your questions because you've identified who we think we might want, and you can probe. So it's less questions, but more depth to find out were we right in our intuition after that first round. So I'll turn it back.
Yep, thanks, John. And input forums, I won't dwell any more on that, but again, there are wonderful reasons to bring stakeholders in during your interview process, and there are also pitfalls. And making sure that you're aware of what those are before you make your decision will be an important part of the search process for you. As far as screening and vetting candidates, we will at MSBA, a team of us between staff and service providers will review all of the applications to ensure that they're complete and compare their backgrounds and experience to your hiring criteria and your leadership profile. We will identify those that we feel best align with what you're looking for, and then we do additional vetting. And there's a page in the proposal that talks about that, how that process unfolds and what we do and how many people we call. And we'll bring that information to the candidate selection meeting for you. We will recommend, for example, that we would suggest you interviews candidates B, C, F, M, and T, or something like that. And then you'll have the conversation in public without divulging any identifying information and so on and so forth. You will also, though, in advance have seen all of the applications. You'll see all of the information. You are bound by data privacy, so we'll have to make sure we explain that if you're looking at it, it's in a secure database. It's usually reviewed electronically. If you want hard copies, we'll work with your district office to ensure there's one set of hard copy in the district office to use. But for instance, you wouldn't have your laptop in a coffee shop to be looking at the applications because someone will walk behind you and see a resume and you just violated the law. So we'll talk through a lot of that because the responsibility of reviewing them is really big. And not every search firm will share with you the full applicant pool. They'll bring recommended candidates to you that they have suggested you interview, but you will not necessarily see anyone else that you might have been interested in had you had the opportunity to take a look at all of those. So this is also spelled out in our proposal, but we will bring forth those we feel best align with what you're looking for, and then it'll be up to you as a board to either accept that slate of candidates, add folks, delete folks, and we'll answer to the best of our ability as to why perhaps candidate C was not suggested. We are bound by the same data privacy laws, so we have to be careful how we answer. Cannot offer anything that might identify who they are, no gender pronouns, no work history mentioned, things such as that, but we'll do our best to share with you why we didn't suggest candidate C, those kinds of things. So it's an interesting process. All right, interviews, this is simply a logistical slide because there's a lot that goes into preparing for the interviews. I'm not going to read all of them, but we do have rubrics you can use. We have electronic tabulation, which everything moves very quickly. Staff in St. Peter will review the results from the board, inputting your thoughts into the rubric. We have staff that'll review stakeholder comments if stakeholders are filling out, for instance, the audience input forms John mentioned. If there's been other interview teams that have conducted interviews, we'll summarize that for your board's deliberation as well. A lot of what we did during the pandemic has stayed, which means online, electronic. I think the efficiencies and the effectiveness, which we learned during the pandemic, early days of the pandemic especially, have become a standard part of our search processes. So there was a silver lining as well. We always touch base with all of the candidates. We have an excellent reputation, I believe, with candidates as far as how we treat those candidates pre-application, during their consideration of their candidacy, and post-selection of another candidate. We have really great relationships with the people that have gone through our processes, and I believe they felt treated fairly and objectively from day one. We'll do press releases, whatever it is you might need to proceed. And then, of course, we're here during the interview rounds. We're there at the planning meeting to do that in person. The other two meetings, we usually meet with the board virtually, but if that's of interest to have us here, we will do so. There's just an additional charge for a couple of meetings that we normally would do virtually now, but we'll be here in person if that's something the board desires. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to John to speak about transition and post-hiring.
Sure. So when you make your decision, we'll offer, if you want us to help transition to the new superintendent. Typically, that would be working with the board. You may have a strategic plan. Typically, you're going to have, goals aligned to that plan annually. I know you have some this year. So if you look at a new hire working in June or July to talk about what goals support your strategic plan and then how it's going to be measured, that's fair to the superintendent too, and it also helps you with evaluation. We'll provide that if you want it. I mean, it's something you could either take access of or not, and then we would continue to be a resource for the new superintendent as they go forward in the first year for questions, and anybody on our group would support and certainly work with you too on that process. How do we want it to look? How do we, your mission vision, hopefully they understand that, they support mission vision through some strategic direction, and then they have some measurables that you and the community could look at to see where are we going in terms of meeting those objectives. But we can help with that if that's something you want. So I just wanted you to know that post-hiring, if that's something you desire.
This is yours as well.
Oh, why Stillwater Area Public Schools? Well, there's a lot to like about your school district. And I'm gonna start at the top because I'm gonna put myself in the position of a candidate. Financially, you passed and you renewed and increased the levies. That's terrific. And you now have a tech levy. That's even better. I took a look at the last couple of years of enrollment data. You were at, according to MDE's site, 8,350, 8,400 last year. It shows you at 8,500 this year. That's stable. It's even more remarkable in the sense that with the pandemic, many districts have unaccounted for 150 students, below projections, which equates to $1 million some dollars. So if I'm looking at this, I'm saying this is good. With the steady enrollment, that looks good. Obviously, your location and livability, your district runs along the St. Croix. Your namesake city, Stillwater, is a tourist destination. You're one of the traditional river towns in Minnesota, Hastings, Anoka, Stillwater. I mean, there's just a lot to like, and you have room. So the enrollment hopefully will be able to stay steady or grow. So that's attractive for a superintendent. You have a variety of academic opportunities and options with a track record of success. One of the things that you have, in my opinion, which 8,500 students is a nice number because it's big enough to give you the ability to provide a lot of opportunities. And you do that. And, I looked at some of the numbers, but I mean, you have AP classes and you have concurrent enrollment and, college in the schools and PSEO, and that's just at the secondary level. But your graduation rate's around 95%. It's a good number. 1,310 on the SAT, and 27's a good. So it doesn't reach everybody because it's 95, but it's a good place to start if you're coming in to work with you on what Stillwater's got. And then you have a history of a wide variety of co-curricular opportunities and a history of success in the arts. And again, the size helps because it gives you the opportunity to offer those. Things are changing. I know that when I was actively working, intramurals was a hard thing to come by, whether it was because we didn't have the facilities or we didn't have the people but that's a section of kids that you want connected to the building. You're able to do that. That's huge, and you've been successful. And all of those things, what underscores all of those things, you got a district that the people in the district support the schools. They like, as I said, your enrollment's stable because you know where people are accounted for, because they want to be here. There's a lot of pride in the Stillwater schools. You're in a great conference, I think. One of the top conferences when it comes to arts and athletics in the metro. There's just a lot to like, and it's all of this is great, but it all stems from support. You wouldn't have passed those levies if you didn't have support of your community. So as a potential candidate, I'd be saying, yeah, there's an awful lot to like about Stillwater. So we believe you're going to get interested candidates, quite a few, I think, because of those reasons. So I don't know if you want me to go on ad nauseum, but I mean, there's just a lot to like.
You know you have a job at MSBA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, just want to make sure, because I lean on him, so. Okay. All right, so, yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate that. He sees a lot of things, I think, that are unique because of his experience in administration in the metro area that I don't see through my eyes. I think complementary strengths are really important on the team, and John and I have those and work really well together. So why MSBA? I'll just give you the highlights. I think there are a lot of reasons, but for us, it boils down to sort of 4 big points. Everything we do at MSBA is through the lens of school board leadership, up to and including superintendent search. All of the services we provide weave into and support superintendent search. It's a model, I think, that is unique in that I have access to governance team. I have access to our HR people. I have access to our attorneys on staff. So I'm able to provide through our searches really an all-in-one, all-encompassing school board focused approach to your search. We support and understand school boards. We also understand how important local control is, and we understand that every district is unique. So we'll support you in your search and do what we feel you are asking us to, but boy, are we going to give you options recommendations, guidance, reminders. Customer service is really important to us in the search services. So everything going through the lens of board leadership is important. And again, we understand Minnesota law. That Open Meeting Law, Data Practices Act, I can't emphasize how important that is during the search process. And with the increasing number of data requests that districts are seeing, you want to make sure that all of your board notes are being kept in accordance with your data retention policies, that they're professional and appropriate should there be a request. All of those sorts of things are really important, and I don't want to oversell it, but it does matter. And then the transparency and communication, I think our Q&A sessions have proven to be tremendous in terms of providing stakeholders access. They cannot say that the board is keeping anything from them because we've made a very large opportunity to ask us anything. I sometimes rephrase questions that are asked either in advance of the Q&A or during the Q&A because we want the questions to be appropriate. But there is not a question that I won't answer. And I think people sometimes feel more comfortable and more confident in the integrity of the process when they've had access to information from a party that's helping guide the board, and it's not necessarily coming from the district or from the board, it's coming from the folks that do this for a living. Also, you seeing all of the applications is important. We rely on you very heavily because we trust you with that data, and we believe that you know what's best for Stillwater area public schools. We'll tell you what we feel. We, though, do not live and breathe this district like you do, so we want to make sure you see those applications and you have a chance to ask us questions about everyone that's applied for the job. Also, no hidden fees. That's one of the things occasionally we have seen come into fruition because we are watching out for our members in areas other than superintendent search, but sometimes there's a search agreement that is shared with a district that includes additional charges for multiple languages or additional charges for a post-hiring workshop or additional charges for some things like that. So we want to just be clear that the fees in our proposal are the fees we will charge. We will not have any surprises for you. And then the post-hiring support, because this is what we do, we live and breathe school boards. And so we are available all of the time. We had 24/7 access. You remember that email from MSBA a few months ago where our directors and associate directors had phones on us 24/7 and answered a lot of board questions. That holds true for superintendent search as well. We want to ensure that you're comfortable with the process, so any and all questions are welcome at any time. And we will not be upset at all if you call us at 10 o'clock on a Friday night or a Sunday morning. Might not answer it if it's 3 in the morning. However, we will get back to you and be very responsive to your questions, your inquiries, emails, texts, so on and so forth. With that, I'm going to simply say that our clients, I believe, speak for the quality of our work. One of the things when you look at the quotes that are in the proposal and some of the quotes I put up here today, you will see that this is a process that at first board members aren't entirely certain that they are going to own the process. That's one of the words we use, board ownership of the process, because you may have never done a search before. Just because you've never done a search before doesn't mean that you should just abdicate decision-making or even recommendations over to someone who doesn't understand your district as well as you do. All of our clients have gone into this thinking, well, we've never done a search, or we did a search previously and it didn't go well. I believe our clients are unanimously satisfied with the fact that their search fit their district and their board. So there are no cookie cutter searches from MSBA. Those steps are standard. Those are pretty important steps. Within those steps, though, there is this lens of board leadership that we feel makes our services very different than some of the other folks you might be talking to. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Just about 20 minutes, so we'd like to open it up for questions from anyone about the proposal, the presentation, or anything else.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I just have a couple of questions to begin. We know that we've gone through a lot of upheaval in schools over the last couple of years, and we know we have shortages of teachers. We know that we have a lot of burned out teachers. I'm wondering what you can tell us about the pool of superintendents. Is it a little thin these days because people are looking to go into different forms of work?
They are smaller than they used to be. I'll start, and then I want John to answer this as well. Pools the last 2 years have been smaller than previously. I do believe it's taken a toll on superintendents. The pandemic, distance learning, all of the issues that you've been dealing with as board members as well. So there are more sitting superintendents taking early retirement or entering the private sector than we have ever seen. Fewer sitting superintendents might be looking for new opportunities just because it's exhausting to be a superintendent right now. What I always say, however, is you're not looking for quantity of applicants. You're looking for quality. You need one superintendent, right? Now, I believe in the days where we had 20 or 30 applicants for some of our pools, it's a good number. 30 people is a lot of people to look through, and you have applications, and it takes you hours and hours to read all of them. I would say fewer than half were qualified to lead a district, and yet they were throwing their hat in the ring to see if they could get an interview. They were curious if their application was strong enough to warrant attention from a school board. So I think now, in our experience, there are smaller pools. However, the quality is consistently higher. They not only have a superintendent's license, for example, they want the job, knowing what the pressures are on candidates these days. So yes, they're smaller. I'm not going to tell you you're going to get 30 or 40 applicants for this position. I would be surprised if you did. We had a search last year that had, last year I think we averaged, the smallest was 4, the largest was probably 25. And I'll have to tell you, the district that had 4 applicants had 4 very strong applicants and had a difficult time selecting the one that they wanted to make an offer to. So I just don't want to put too much emphasis on the size of the pool. I would say the quality is more important. But yes, it's been a challenging few years for superintendents, and there are fewer people willing at this moment to take on the challenge. So, John, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would agree with that. We just did one where there were 6 candidates, but 3 were quality and they were targeted. And I want to emphasize targeted because I think in today's climate, there was a time when, well, maybe I'll I'll apply for a superintendency and see if I can get it so I can get some experience. But I have a superintendency in mind somewhere down the line, and this will aid me in doing that. I think the job's tough enough now that people aren't going to wade into that, but they will target a place they want to be. And I think that positions you very well. So while it may not be 30, I think there will be people with strong credentials looking at you because of who you are.
Okay, thank you. You answered my follow-up question, too. Anyone else? Questions? Director Sherman?
Yes, I was just curious on the input forums with finalists. That's what you're saying is optional, right? The input forums, or is that separate from the focus groups?
Separate from the focus groups. Focus groups, if you would like those, are done early in the process, and focus groups will help inform the leadership profile and also the screening of the applications. You'll hear from your stakeholders what they're looking for in a leader. We'll compare and contrast how their responses align with what you've already told us for the leadership profile, so that when you assess your candidates, your applicants, you have the stakeholders' voice from the survey and focus groups. Okay, they also help shape the candidate questions you'll be asking in the interviews. The input forums are at the end of the process, and that's usually we recommend during the second interview because they're more in-depth that you can go.
Okay.
You do one of those 3 things. Either you use the results of that stakeholder survey in the back of your mind as board members to screen and decide who you'd like to make an offer to, or you have input forums, which are interview committees, round robin, lots of folks involved in interviewing, or you have stakeholder representatives observing your interviews as a board and providing you feedback on strengths and opportunities for growth.
Do you see a trend in which options districts are choosing to do, and could you share that? I just am curious.
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. We are seeing the trend away from having lots of people involved in the interviews and having the round robins. The pandemic, I think, exacerbated that because it used to be a candidate would come in and take all kinds of tours of the community, and they'd tour the buildings, and they'd have a host that would walk them around. They'd meet with staff for an interview. They'd meet with community members for an interview. When the pandemic hit and you couldn't do those things in person anymore, a lot of that shut down. We did still do them virtually for many districts, and we still did some interviews. I think, though, boards have, this is a trend, I'm not saying it's what is right, but boards have focused more on We are the board. We've been hired to make this, or elected to make this hiring decision. We've heard from them in this regard. We don't necessarily need as much input as we thought we did. Also, the composition of some of those input forums were, I would say, political, that the right people had to be on those interview committees to meet the expectations of certain groups in the community that wanted a voice in who you hire. And I think boards, having really been challenged the last few years, have, what's not winnowed down, prioritized, we know what we're doing and we're the board and we're ready to make this decision. And we, in some cases, aren't going to go through the motions of having input forums or interview committees unless we really, truly, deeply want their input. But if we already know what we're going to do because we're confident in our decision-making abilities, we're confident in the stakeholder input, it seems like it's more like a luxury, not a necessity anymore. So the trend is away from that.
Okay.
Not that it doesn't still happen.
More upfront. It seems like there's a little bit more heavy emphasis upfront than what I've seen in districts, other
Yes.
searches here.
Yep.
I think the key is transparency of your process, that there's always a greater risk with interviewing. We already went through that for what someone might ask and which might be inappropriate. You're the decision-making group, so it needs to be, but the public needs to see it because the push-pull is on stakeholder input is roles and responsibilities. You have to be crystal clear that if you're asking me to be, what is my role? Am I to advise? Okay, that's one thing. But if I think then I'm going to be irritated or angry if, why did you ask me to be involved if you weren't going to hire the candidate that I want? So that's where boards struggle. So if you could do the stakeholder survey, it gives you an overview and it's anonymous. You'll get a sense. Now you might find with that data that there might be a burning issue that you're not aware of. And I don't know if you talked a little bit about the survey data and the raw data, but yeah, starting there and then determining whether or not
It's necessary.
but the public for sure needs to know what your process is. Part of the reason for the Q&A, so they know each step. But they also need to know that at the end of the day, the board's going to make the decision that they think's in the best interest for Stillwater schools. So,
I like that term, push-pull, because when
Yeah.
you're involving stakeholders, that's definitely what it is. It's the push and the pull. There are pros and cons, pitfalls and opportunities. And you will choose what's right for your district, and it won't necessarily be what's right for the clients we worked with last week or the clients we will work with 2 weeks from now. There is no one way to involve stakeholders, and so I don't want to say there's a prescriptive process that this is exactly how you should involve stakeholders. It might not fit Stillwater area. And so we want to be sure that you're informed of those pros and cons and you make the decision that feels right for you. Informed decision-making is our goal, that you will know why you're choosing to conduct the search the way that you are. Thanks for asking that. That's
Director Riley.
Thanks. I love that you clarified that with what the role of the stakeholders is, because we currently have that problem or issue within our district with our community design team, and the community thinks that the outcome of the design team is, what is the religious document now that lives within the community instead of the board coming to the final decision on what is right for the district. So I think that's very important, and I don't think that was very well communicated in our past groups. I did want to clarify one thing, only because I've dealt with this situation prior, and this is about the critical nature of personnel information. And as a board, an elected board, we take on that responsibility and understand that this information is confidential and to be kept confidential. But in the past, and maybe it came from MSBA training, I'm not sure. I had tried to get some information on superintendent evaluation, past evaluations, which was I was not allowed to take according to the district and how the district operated and did its procedures. However, according to statute, I am allowed that information on my person. And I actually had somebody from MSBA misstate that, and our attorney had to get involved to allow me to have that information because it's part of my duties as an official. So I just want to clarify that the board is entitled to that information. It doesn't have to be one copy viewed inside the building, but they do understand and own the responsibility of that confidential nature of the personnel information.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I would say MSBA, in the years that I have been there, errs on the side of caution in terms of recommending what we will say. And I had someone, because we always say if there's one copy in the district office and you view it one at a time, hard copy, don't take it with you in your briefcase and leave, because if you lose your briefcase, or if you're in a car accident and the resumes are fluttering around the street, we tend to think worst-case scenarios that may open you up to potential liability. So I could see us recommending something on the conservative side of those policies and procedures. Correct. And we also then defer to the local control. And we'll always say, in our experience, please clarify with your local legal counsel so that they are comfortable with what you proceed to do as a board. So yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Director Kelsenberg.
Sure. This is a question. You have the executive search team. There's probably a lot of people represented there. Who would be our contact? Would we have a person appointed contact or a committee, or how would that work?
Me and John. I'm
The
first
two
chair,
of
he's
us
second
as your
chair.
Primary, and I'm local too. I'm here in the Twin Cities, so.
Okay.
A lot of our greater Minnesota searches are led by some of our service providers that live up north or in Alexandria or somewhere like that. For districts on the larger side, however, John and I are the team we are the point of contact for all of those searches, and we're the customer service folks you deal with on a sometimes daily basis. So thanks for asking that too.
But just to that point, you'll be able to get us, if you called down to MSBA, if you couldn't get one of us, somebody will get us, and we'll get back to you.
Speed dial right here. I'm having.
Well,
Yes.
I'm not that fast, but I mean, as quickly as reasonably possible.
Right.
But no, I think customer service is something we kind of pride ourselves on, so.
Director Hockert.
Kind of jumping back or forward to the end of the process, thinking about kind of that last night where we have to make a decision. What is the process for consensus building? Kind of what do you do in helping the board facilitate a discussion? Like, how does that actually all come out at the very end part of that process?
Okay, great question. During the steps leading up to round one interviews, for example, we will meet with the board for interview training, as we mentioned. We have guidelines. I used to call them scripts, but that's not entirely right. So we have guidelines that say, here's an interview guideline. It's about 2 pages. Here's your deliberations guideline. Because we want you running these interviews. We are there, we're the fly on the wall. We're holding up signs that say 30 minutes or 15 minutes. We're there to greet candidates, seat them, escort them out, that kind of thing. But you're running this interview because, again, this person's going to be working for you. So our interview, for example, guidelines, before interviews, we'll make sure that you understand opening statement by the board chair. And the board chair can massage it so it fits their personality. But these are the things that you say, and you set expectations for the interview. You know, we have 1 hour. We have 17 questions for you. Our last question will be, do you have any questions for us? And you can use any remaining time for those questions. Each board member will take a turn asking questions. So an introduction briefly by the board chair that lets the candidate know, okay, that's how it's going to happen. And it's that setting expectations. And then you would each, during the interviews, ask questions, you know, kind of in a round robin. You want to ask the same questions in the same order, no follow-up questions. Level playing field is really important. So it feels a little prescribed, but it is how you need to interview candidates so that everyone's being treated fairly and you're not engaging in really casual conversation about things that aren't relative to the position or things that other candidates didn't get to address. So then you ask the questions, and then the board chair has a closing statement. You know, thank you for being with us. As you know, we're interviewing 6 candidates over the next 2 days, and we will let you know when we finish our deliberations as to what our next steps are. Our intentions are to hold round 2 on February 14th, whatever it might be. So it's really clear how the interview goes. Then, once you have completed the interviews, whether it's round 1 or if it's round 2 and you're down to maybe 3 candidates, there's a deliberations side to both of those nights, round 1 and round 2, that's really important. So what we'll do is we have that for you as well, and it says, here's how you deliberate, and the board chair will lead it. Again, you're leading this, not us. So the board chair will open it up and say, okay, that was, 3 phenomenal candidates. let's now deliberate, and you're doing this in public, so what you say is really important and how you say it. Let's now deliberate about each of the candidates. And the first thing that will happen is MSBA will present an overview of what we call your EMD results. That's the rubric we use. It's exceeds expectations, meets expectations, doesn't meet expectations on every single question. So if you have 15 questions, each of you as individuals are rating them as an E, an M, or a D for every question. We provide you, the board, with an overview of the results, not anonymous. You don't know who's answering which on which candidate, but you can see the questions. The more E's a candidate has, the higher you felt as board members their expectations, your expectations were met. That's good. The more D's they have doesn't meet, it's like, okay, that might be a red flag. If they have a lot of does not meet expectations, that means that we as a collective kind of agreed that that candidate. So it's one tool to help you ascertain where you're leaning as board members. It's not the be-all, end-all. You don't make your decision based on any kind of ranking of 1, 2, and 3 candidates. But we'll do that for round one. It'll take me about 2 minutes to give you an overview of that data. It's just a brief overview. Then the board chair will move into, all right, well, now let's each of us share how we felt the candidates, how they come across. We really focus on you saying positive things about the candidates. So this is part of the interview training as well. We'll talk about our first candidate. Let's say that it's Jane Doe. And someone will start, well, I thought Jane had a really strong answer to the financial question. I was really impressed with how she handled the question about budgeting and financial integrity or something like that. And then the next board member agrees or says, you know what? I also felt like her background in equity is the strongest I think I've seen. That was great. So you each say at least one strength, and you keep going around until you've kind of exhausted all the strengths. And then you allow us to share with you stakeholder feedback if there was some. If there's audience input forms that have summarized what the stakeholders felt, if they're watching round 2, I may say, well, according to the stakeholders, many times it was mentioned that Jane's acumen in communication skills and visibility was mentioned by many of the stakeholders as a strength. And so I'll give you an overview of the strength from the stakeholders, okay? And then you would say, all right, let's move on to John Doe, and let's talk about John. And you each say something positive about John. And then I would give you an overview of the stakeholders' thoughts on John. And then you move on to Susie, whatever. So when you've concluded that, you have acknowledged publicly the strengths of these candidates. We will share with you during training. There's no need to point out any of their failures or anything negative about their interview. If they were really nervous and it showed, you do not need to say in a public meeting, I thought John was really nervous. I mean, why would you need to say that? So we always say, don't go there. Just focus on those strengths. As you then, as chair, you would then start to indicate where you're leaning. Again, you're not taking a vote. It's not quantifiable. We want someone to say, well, you know what? I'm leaning toward bringing John and Sue and Tim back for round 2. And someone else might say, yeah, me as well. Or I think John and Tim and, Susan. And so you start to sense where you're at, but you're building consensus in a non-formulaic way. You're not casting votes and counting votes and sort of in a black and white way trying to decide who to move into round 2 or who to hire in the second round. So the deliberations naturally evolve. It's always fascinating to us to watch boards reach consensus because we really would hope you can get a unanimous decision, especially on the final candidate. We would love to see a unanimous support for this person and not a split vote. It does happen. It's not ideal. And it happens more quickly than you'd think sometimes. And I had a board one time that had 3 really strong candidates, and 3.5 hours later, they still didn't know who they wanted to hire. So when they had sort of exhausted what they're thinking, we suggested using the opportunities for growth as a possible tiebreaker. That's the only time we will suggest you point out that someone's background in finance is not as strong as the other 2 candidates. You can kind of use, because you'll notice things that no one's perfect, aren't as strong with some folks than other folks. You can use those if you need to break a tie. Otherwise, we encourage deliberations to be nothing but positive because, this is a long answer, I hope I'm getting, because the first choice does not always take the job. your first choice may, for example, have gotten another offer or changed their mind, didn't get a real good vibe from the board during the interview, or doesn't accept negotiations with the rate that the salary you're offering is just not enough. If you have treated all of your finalists with the kind of respect you would want as a candidate, we have seen the second choice, if there is such a thing, second choice candidate, happily accept the position because they were treated so well and thrive in that district. Now, if you as a board had pointed out anything negative during deliberations, because they're probably watching, if you're live streaming it, they might have bad taste in their mouth and not necessarily want to work for you. So it evolves, and you're the ones holding the conversations. We are literally sitting on the sidelines watching you do your work. And we've heard from more than one client of ours that they have been so surprised at the conclusion of the search that the entire search process ended up being a big team building exercise, because they learned how to work together. They learned how to bring forth different viewpoints, and I don't want to say disagreements if that's quite right, to reach consensus. You know, we've had boards where it was maybe 4-2 in terms of the candidate they wanted to hire. And those four felt very strongly, these two felt very strongly. And someone that was in the minority said, you know what? I would support this candidate more than the other. However, in the interest of unity, I will vote for this candidate. And it became a 6-0 vote. So it's amazing how the process helps boards work together. And that's, I think, an unexpected benefit of it, because it's not, this is how you do it. It's evolving with you and your board and your candidates.
Well, and you'll get maybe 7 members, 6 have exceeds, 1 has, does not meet. And you may hear the same comment, it was the reason why you put down does not meet, the others put, but then you get to deliberate that, you get to talk about that, and that's where you get to consensus. But as it relates to the last night, if there's consensus, and we'd work with you if we're selected on what's gonna happen, the next day negotiations would start for some of the reasons Barb got at. There may be a candidate that's got their hat in 3 rings, and a really strong candidate, so you would work out your board process to leave that last night and start negotiating immediately with, depending on how you want to do that, but that's down the road, so.
Did I answer your question? Because I sure talked a
Oh
lot.
my goodness, yes, it was
I get
great.
excited. I get excited about this.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up? What is MSBA's role in kind of the negotiations piece, that very last final piece of, it sounds like we'd offer as a board the next day, that you guys would not be involved? Am I reading that correctly?
Our role ends after the round 2, unless you don't reach negotiations and you need to revisit either an interview or something like that. However, we have the model contract for MSBA and MASA that the 2 organizations in partnership developed that we feel is a very strong contract. Because contracts vary so much between districts, we, again, with local control, say, okay, this is yours to negotiate. Here's what we would suggest from a model contract perspective, and yet this is your role, it's your due diligence, it's your responsibility to negotiate it with your chosen candidate. So we don't negotiate contracts.
No, you've likely been through it, but it's one of the most awkward things for a superintendent to negotiate with a board. And I used to negotiate with the principals, and you're negotiating with a colleague. It's really difficult, and it's awkward for both parties, but we would provide the sample contract, and then what we found, and I'm sure you have too, is different things matter to different people. You know, depending on where you are in life, you may not need health insurance, you may value time over money, it's all those things. But whatever process you decide on to negotiate, that either whether it's a committee or whether it's a one, that's what the conversation has to be, and we can't really be involved in that because you have the budget and it's your decision. So.
Thank you.
Director Barbani.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. Barb and John, thank you very much. I have 2 questions for you. Barb, this is to you. So you said, I understand the consensus process. However, for the EMD, are we moving away from the normal scoring criteria? So there will be no competencies to look at, there will be no scores with respect to those competencies that also aligns with the EMD. There will be none of that. So it's just observation, it's listening to the candidates speak, and then decisions are made based on the candidates' feedback to those questions. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, and the questions revolve around those hiring criteria and the competencies. And we recommend for each of your I'll say hiring criteria is that you ask perhaps 2 questions about that same criteria, but you ask them in slightly different ways and at different points in the interview. So they're tied to the criteria, but their answer themselves is what we would suggest you rank as exceeding, meeting, or not meeting your expectations, or their depth of experience, that sort of thing.
Yes, okay, so those EMDs are not aligned to any form of numbers, so you're taking the numbers out, right?
Question 1, question 2, question 3, there's an E, an M, and a D for
Okay.
question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4.
Okay,
Does
that
that
makes
make
sense.
sense?
All
Okay.
right, so my second thanks for that, thanks for the clarification there. My second question is, you've been in this field for quite some time, you've got a lot of experiences with so many districts. Can you both tell us your individual experiences, what's been the biggest challenge for you?
In superintendent search?
Yes.
Wow, that's a great question. You want to go first? You want to go second?
Well, you've done much more of the interviewing than I have.
Okay. Boy, that's a great question. All right, I have one, and I'm very clear what is and is not within my own control. One of the biggest challenges for me has been the process is working wonderfully, the candidate is interested, and then the board drops the ball. We've had some phenomenal candidates that made it through the vetting process. They've been working with us. They've been asking us questions about the opportunity. We've been vetting them, talking to references, all of that. And then when they actually are potentially offered the position, I've had a couple of candidates say to me, you know, I just didn't think they were excited about me as a candidate. Or I didn't feel like the district had their act together in terms of where they were going. I didn't sense any vision from the school board. And so the disappointment for me personally, when maybe drops the ball isn't the right word, but everything has gone so well, and then the candidate goes, nah. And it's usually once we've handed things over exclusively to the board. Because I think some boards forget it's a two-way street. You know, the candidate is interviewing you as well. You're interviewing them. And right now, I don't know if it's be called a buyer's market or a seller's market, but there are more opportunities potentially than we have applicants. So they have many choices to make. And if a board's not making a great impression on them, that is disappointing to me. I guess that would be a challenge because I can't control that part of it. You know, I try to help boards understand when you reach that point, and especially when you're answering questions in an interview, be excited about their questions. If they ask a question about the strategic plan, all of you should chime in if you have something to say. Don't let one person answer all the questions, and don't just, sit and look at the candidate. Try to be engaged. Show them how well you work together. Build off of each other's ideas so that they can see what you're like as a board and who they'd be working for. So I can suggest that and train that, but my mom would always say you can't legislate personality. And sometimes personalities just don't make a great impression on the candidate. And when that happens, that's disappointing. And yet, we just find another candidate or redo a search, find an interim for that year, redo the search for no cost because it was not a successful search at that point. But I'd say that's it. I've never been asked that question.
Well, no, it's a great question, and I'm looking at it through a different lens, but I've seen, it's hard to interview, and it's even harder to interview when you really want it. And so we've seen candidates not show their true colors because they're so nervous, because there's just so much at stake. And I hate to say this, but then that falls a little bit on the board to make them conversational, and comfortable, so you get a chance to see who they really are. And counseled a couple people that we knew were stronger probably than they came across because of their nerves. It's a delicate line, but I would agree with Barb. Right now, more than ever, candidates are looking at you folks and saying, do they get along? Do they seem like they like each other? Do they seem like they have some sense of where they want to take the district? And we didn't put it on the screen, but it's true, and it's part of the financial piece, it's part of the community support, it's part of that reason they want to come here. As I said, you'll have candidates. There's a lot of reasons to come here. But make no mistake, they'll be watching your affect as much as you probably are watching theirs, so.
Just a quick follow-up there, Chair Petrie, if you don't mind. Just a quick follow-up there. I appreciate the fact that you said they'll be watching. And I know the wise ones will watch our board meetings and decide if they want to be here or not. So the wise ones will do their homework before they get here. Have you ever had board members fight in front of candidates? When I mean fight, not necessarily physical fights, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Like quarrel in front of candidates. I mean, that's definitely, it's embarrassing. But they talk about some, maybe it's a 4-2 with respect to board members. Some will not appreciate one over the other. And have you had situations where those numbers have actually gone to the next level where the a member insists, I am not going to accept, I'm not voting for that person, or I don't think that person is the right person. And sometimes maybe say things in front of the candidate during the interviews.
I have never seen it during the interviews, because the interviews are a fairly controlled process. You know, you have sort of this script of how you're going to open and the questions you're going to ask and the order in which they ask. And then when the candidate is asking questions, board members are trying to make a positive impression, and they don't disagree with one another ever in front of the candidate. During deliberations, though, yes, once candidates have left and boards are discussing what we're going to do next, going from round 1 to round 2, that normally doesn't happen, because if you interview 6, it's a common number, sometimes it's fewer, but if you interview 6, there's usually 3 that become pretty apparent based on the EMD form and the board interviews and your own gut sense that these are the 3 we want to move to round 2. However, in that final round, once, like this one board that went for 3.5 hours, they knew they had 3 strong candidates. Most often, I do see board members who are in the minority acknowledge that this should be a unanimous decision, and so we will change our vote, or I will change my vote. I had one board once where there was one board member who was adamant, and it was not against the chosen candidate that the other 6 board members wanted. It was for another candidate. So it wasn't a negative on the person being hired.
Right.
It was simply, they felt very strongly for their own reasons that this person was the best person for the job. I think they did it pretty respectfully, but it was a 6-1 vote. Not the end of the world. You know, a candidate knows they're going to come in, but I've had a candidate also tell me, if this is a split vote, 4-3, I won't accept the job. The candidate wants to walk in to support and board unity. So luckily it was a unanimous vote, but there was someone that said, if this is a split board, it had been historically split on other things. And she just told me, if it's split, I don't want to walk into a 4-3 board. So,
Appreciate that.
yeah,
Thank you.
yep, you're welcome.
But you made a good point there. I guarantee you that the candidates that are looking at Stillwater will call friends of theirs and contacts of theirs and ask, because I did it, you know, what is the board like? What can you tell me about that? What's the dynamic? So the good candidates, the one that are worth talking, will have done their homework, for sure.
Director Kelsenberg.
Yeah, so the process is all open, right? So when you're discussing candidate A, B, C, D, they could be watching that and they'll see themselves, and then when you're doing interviews, will they be able to see the interview before them, start to formulate their answer and even change it to override what somebody else might have answered previously?
You want to answer that one? This has been something we've noticed since the pandemic, yes.
Well, it depends on how you structure it.
Your interviews.
If you're gonna live play them and give a third candidate an opportunity to see it, you do run that risk. But we would work with you on how to structure that so that's not the case, because you don't want to give somebody an unfair advantage by having the ability to listen to the other candidates and then change their answer. So
Sequester them, or, I mean, it's the only thing I can imagine, but
That's an
you might have.
interesting point. Have a green room or something outside where they have to wait without their phones.
well, it depends. I mean, you know, we're talking about transparency. We're getting a little bit into the weeds, but
Sure.
you know, do you have to go live with what you're doing, or can you tape so people can see it and watch the interviews, but after the fact, so you've been transparent? Anybody that wants to come in, but I would tell you that if you don't broadcast it live and a candidate comes in and sits, that ought to tell you a lot about integrity.
Okay.
You know, if you're a follow-up candidate. So I mean, like, there's ways to structure it so it's a fair process. And we would work with you on that, you know, but obviously, again, it's your call. How do you want to do it? But I think if you did just go live, yes, I would have the opportunity, if I was sitting in another room to watch it, then I could come in and tailor my answers and then if I didn't get the job, if I'm number one, I'd cry foul play, right? I mean, it wasn't it wasn't an even playing surface. So, good question, though. But logistically, those are the things you have to talk about. And even, there's some built-ins, and I don't want to take, too much, but there are some built-ins. So for example, when Barb was talking about input forum for stakeholders input, you're a large enough district where you may not select who, because that would be risky, I would put to you, if you were to say, the president of the teachers union needs to be in, and she'll get one of these forum feedbacks. Rather, you throw it to the teachers union and say, you get one representative. Now, they may pick the president. Custodians, you get one representative. If you've got a curriculum committee, you get one representative. And so you've got a room full of maybe 10 representatives that you didn't pick, but are key stakeholder groups, and then they could give input on whether these are the 3 strengths of candidate A, these are 3 areas of growth, and they could do that for every candidate. That's controlled. They don't get to talk, and you don't have a full boardroom. So all of those logistical things we can work with if we're selected. So great question, though.
Yeah. And as for the A, B, and C, when you're talking about candidate deliberations, they'll be watching it if you're live streaming that. They won't know who they are, though. They won't know if they're candidate C or candidate D, because it's purposefully vague because we cannot identify who you're talking about. They won't know that they're candidate B. You're not saying, well, when candidate B was principal in Matamidi for 10 years.
They can't do that.
No, you're not saying that. So they won't know who you're talking about. And so when you pass the motion to interview candidates B, C, F, and M, that's what you pass. After that, then we'll read the names aloud of the finalists, okay? And we'll read them not in the order of the alphabet. We won't read candidate B, candidate C, because we don't want people knowing who, we'll mix it up. So they won't know the ABC process, who you're talking about. With live streaming, though, we have seen this become a problem because during the pandemic, every district moved to live streaming their board meetings. They had to, meetings by electronic means. You had to do that. Now people have become accustomed to it and they expect it. Even though you're meeting in person, the doors are open. You're meeting requirements of the open meeting law right here. So there are clients of ours who have said, we're not going to live stream the interviews for exactly what your concern was, is it creates an advantage for people coming later. So they don't live stream them. Now, if the community or stakeholders understand why you're not doing that anymore, they'll be okay with it. If they think you just pulled the plug on live streaming because you feel like being secretive, there's going to be an uproar. If you, though, explain that we want the very best person for this job and we don't want to create an advantage for some candidates over others, don't you want us to find the best person for the job? That means we're not live streaming. And if that's explained really clearly, oh, okay, I get it, and they'll come and watch in person if that's important to them. Or you could record them and put them on the district website after you've finished all the interviews of that round. So it's one of those decisions you'll get to make. We'll tell you pros and cons. There's a lot of them, but you'll choose what fits you.
Thank you. Well, you've given us a lot of time tonight. We appreciate your flexibility. Are there any other questions before we wrap it up? Okay, if not, thank you very much for coming. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
We appreciate it. We'd be
And
honored
we'll
to
be
assist with the search.
back in touch
Please do
with
what's
you.
best for your district and keep us informed and let us know if you have questions.
Thank you.
All right?
And
Okay.
remember, even if we're not selected, we're still the School Boards Association,
Exactly.
so we're here to work with you. Thanks again.
We know where
You
to
know where
find
we
you.
are.
Okay.
All
Thank
right,
you very much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Joan,
Okay.
thank you for the water.
This meeting is adjourned.